Welcome to the most intense chapter in our ongoing saga, where a determined former Green Beret sniper takes on a notorious biker gang, threatening her orchard and her family's livelihood. Imagine dozens of roaring motorcycles flooding into a quiet Montana valley, only to be met by someone with the training and courage to stop them in their tracks. The tension reaches its boiling point when the Outlaws launch their final assault, and every shot fired could mean life or death. If you're curious about how one single mother marshals the strength of her community to fight back, you won't want to miss a moment of this story's climax. So grab your seat and follow along from start to finish. While you're here, remember to subscribe to the channel for more captivating tales and to stay updated on each new release. Buckle up. The action is about to begin. Samantha Alvarez pressed her palm flat against the rough bark of an ancient apple tree, inhaling deeply as the soft morning sun filtered across the rows of her orchard. This place, her sanctuary, spread for nearly 200 acres across Bridgewater Valley, Montana, surrounded by rolling hills that glowed a gentle gold at sunrise. Samantha had not always been a farmer. For 10 years, she had served as an elite Green Beret sniper, someone trained to rescue hostages in hostile territories and to protect convoys in regions scarred by endless conflict. She was no stranger to high-stakes missions. In fact, she had excelled at them, specializing in the precise elimination of threats before they even suspected she was on their trail. Yet when it became clear that such a life was no place to raise two children on her own, she hung up the uniform, purchased this orchard at the far edge of the valley, and did her best to become just another quiet neighbor who grew apples and made cider. But even here, where each day followed the familiar rhythm of watering, pruning, harvesting, and pressing, traces of her past clung to her reflexes. The orchard, now named Whispering Pines in reference to the tall conifers that lined the property, bore subtle signs of Samantha's tactical mind. The cider press barn had been reinforced with sturdier walls than any normal farmer would invest in. Outbuildings had vantage points that provided sweeping views of both the orchard and the winding roads leading into the valley. Samantha's children, 16-year-old Julia and 10-year-old Charlie, grew up thinking this was all normal. Though they noticed their mother's intense awareness, the kids rarely questioned it beyond sharing that she always knew when a storm was coming or when a suspicious car drove through the valley one time too many. That morning, Samantha was midway through her first check of the irrigation lines when she heard an engine's low growl in the distance. Nothing unusual, she told herself at first, as tourists and delivery drivers often came early to enjoy the orchard or to drop off supplies. But the faint roar kept building. She paused, glancing at her watch. It was too early for standard delivery trucks. Her trained eyes narrowed, scanning the tree line with precise deliberation. Sure enough, the vehicle, a black SUV with tinted windows, made its slow approach along the dirt road that cut across the property's northern edge. 3 days in a row, she thought, making a mental note of how many times she had spotted that SUV. Locals had no reason to lurk. They came in for produce, drove away, and were done. Whoever these people were, they had some other agenda. She took a moment to memorize the shape of the vehicle, the angle of the tires, and the reflection of the sun on the windshield, small details that might be crucial later on. The SUV crawled forward, pausing near the orchard's gate. Samantha gripped the spigot on the irrigation system more tightly, her mind moving toward readiness for a confrontation. But after a long hesitation, the driver accelerated away, disappearing back up the slope. Exhaling slowly, Samantha wondered how long it would be before these strangers stopped just driving by. Something told her that if they were scoping out the orchard, they were only waiting for the right moment to make themselves known. Julia appeared between the rows of apple trees, her tall figure weaving through the neat lines as she waved a smartphone in her hand. At 16, she carried herself with a blend of teenage energy and a maturity that sometimes surprised Samantha. Though she lacked her mother's extensive military training, Julia had picked up on the orchard's silent cues. She recognized when her mother's shoulders tensed or when her gaze flicked toward the ridge. Despite being a teenager preoccupied with homework, sports practice, and an after-school job at the local diner, Julia knew exactly when something was amiss in her mother's eyes. "Mom," she called out, a hint of alarm coloring her tone. "Anthony Wong just called from the general store. He said some bikers came in late last night, asking a bunch of questions about the orchard. They were wearing matching jackets, Onyx Vipers or something like that. He wanted to let you know. The mention of a biker gang name made Samantha's heart thump once, hard before she steadied it. It wasn't that she was afraid. Her training had dealt with opponents far more dangerous and well-armed than a local motorcycle club, but she was protective of her children and cautious about anything that threatened their quiet life. The orchard had become her fortress of peace and her children's sanctuary, far removed from the nightmares she had witnessed overseas. Julia continued, "They were asking who owns Whispering Pines, if you're behind on any payments, and how big the place is. Mr. Wong said they also wanted to know how much cider we produce each season. It's not normal, right?" Samantha brushed a stray strand of dark hair from her face, maintaining a calm expression. Internally, though, her pulse thrummed with old instincts. "You're right. It's not normal. Let's head back toward the barn, gather Charlie, and see what we're dealing with." As if on cue, 10-year-old Charlie jogged around the corner with a red bucket in one hand. Behind him trotted their Australian cattle dog, Scout, whose alert ears were pricked forward. Charlie's hair ruffled in the cool breeze, and Samantha noticed how serious his young face had grown. He had that same look Julia had, an unspoken awareness of shifting tension. Scout let out a low growl, as though he, too, sensed a presence in the orchard that didn't belong. Samantha gave her son's shoulder a gentle squeeze, noting that the dog was staring up the ridge. "Take Scout and your sister to the barn," she said. "Put things away for the day. I'm going to head into town. Anthony might have more details, and we should be ready for anything." Without questioning, Charlie nodded, and Julia corralled him toward the barn. Samantha watched her children go, that old, familiar protectiveness swelling in her chest. She had moved here precisely to give them a stable home, far from the chaos of her old life. Now that security felt threatened, and she would not wait passively to see what happened next. The dusty road into Bridgewater's small downtown area wound along the valley floor, passing fenced-in cattle pastures, a few rundown barns, and clusters of modest homes. On either side, pine-covered slopes rose toward rugged mountain peaks. The early morning sun highlighted each ridge in a gentle wash of gold. Normally, Samantha would have enjoyed the drive, perhaps remembering the orchard's progress, or thinking of new cider recipes to test for the upcoming autumn fair. Instead, her mind swirled with contingencies. If these bikers were truly Onyx Vipers, how would they escalate pressure? Intimidation was usually the first step. Then came threats. Finally, they moved in aggressively once they determined their target was vulnerable. At the far end of Bridgewater's main street stood the general store, a squat brick building that had served the valley since pioneer days. People said it predated the official founding of the town by at least a decade, with old logs from a century ago forming part of the foundation. Anthony Wong, the store's current owner, had a wide smile that set people at ease, a knack for remembering exactly what brand of flour you preferred, and a general goodwill that made him a beloved figure. Samantha parked her pickup and stepped inside, the bell over the door jangling softly. Anthony stood behind the counter, restocking a shelf of canned vegetables. When he saw Samantha, he set the cans aside and lowered his voice. "Morning, Ms. Alvarez. Heard about the folks who've been snooping around your orchard. These bikers were here last night, just as I was locking up. 4 of them, each wearing the same black leather vest with a cobra emblem in silver stitching. They asked all about you." She nodded. "Julia said they inquired about the orchard size, ownership, how much cider I make. Anything else that stood out?" Leaning forward, Anthony glanced toward the entrance, making sure no one was eavesdropping. "Yes, they asked if your orchard is financially stable. One of them made a point to ask if you had any debts or trouble paying the mortgage. I told them you were doing just fine, but they didn't seem happy to hear that." He shrugged. "I also heard them muttering about someone named Crusher, but I couldn't catch more." The name hung in the air, resonating with Samantha's awareness that a threat had emerged from a potentially larger network of criminals. Biker clubs sometimes operated on the fringes of small towns. Some were harmless, but certain chapters or expansions specialized in extortion, property theft, and intimidation. This apparently was the latter sort. "Thank you for letting me know," she said quietly. "If they come back, don't tell them anything else. Just keep an eye out. I don't want you or anyone else in the valley to get hurt." Anthony folded his arms, a faint frown lining his face. I've got a feeling these men aren't here to make friendly deals, Ms. Alvarez. You be careful, too. Before leaving, Samantha stocked up on supplies, extra canned goods, some bulk flour, a few hardware items that might come in handy if the orchard needed reinforcing. As she loaded her truck, her mind shifted to Sheriff Delgado, an older man who had served the valley for decades. If trouble was brewing, she needed him in the loop. However, a small, niggling voice in her head reminded her that small-town police departments often lack the resources or willingness to stand up to well-organized criminal enterprises. She tried to handle it diplomatically first, but her instincts told her she might soon need to rely on her old skill set in a much bigger way. Sheriff Armando Delgado's office embodied a sense of timelessness with its worn leather furniture, scratchy radio, and a pot of coffee perpetually steaming in the corner. Beneath framed certificates and old photos of rodeo champions hung a service plaque commemorating 30 years of law enforcement in the region. Delgado, a man in his late 50s, greeted Samantha with a warm smile and a handshake that spoke of familiarity. There weren't many single mothers in Bridgewater who ran large-scale orchards, and fewer still who exuded Samantha's quiet intensity. When she explained that she believed a biker club called the Onyx Vipers was snooping around her property, Delgado's cheerful demeanor vanished. He scratched his salt and pepper mustache, sighing. I've heard rumors about a gang expanding from Nevada into parts of Montana. Not sure if it's the same one, but they go for small businesses, especially if there's a chance of a forced sell or an easy extortion racket. With a hesitant frown, he rolled a pencil between his fingers. We don't have evidence of any crimes yet. They come in on bikes, fill up at the gas station, buy a burger, and head out. Nothing we can pin on them unless they make a real move. Samantha knew that was likely the official line. I can appreciate that. But they've definitely been scoping out my orchard, and they've asked about debts. Delgado cocked an eyebrow. Your orchard's doing all right, financially speaking? Yes, she replied. I got a good deal from the previous owner, and thanks to the last harvest season, I'm in a decent spot. She paused. But the orchard isn't the only thing they could threaten. If they get the impression they can bully me, or the town, they'll escalate quickly. The sheriff nodded, scribbling a note on a pad. I'll ask my deputies to drive by your place more often, maybe park near your orchard to discourage them. But we're spread thin. There's me, 2 full-time deputies, and a part-timer who helps on weekends. Samantha managed a tight smile, though her mind was already spinning with far more robust strategies. I understand. I just wanted to keep you informed. As she left the station, Delgado followed her onto the cracked sidewalk, lowering his voice. Look, Ms. Alvarez, I've been around long enough to know a military veteran's stance when I see one. I'm guessing you can take care of yourself better than most folks in these parts. Just don't let it escalate if you can avoid it, okay? I don't want anybody hurt. She met his gaze squarely, thinking of her children and all the orchard represented. Same here, Sheriff. Thank you. Walking to her truck, Samantha felt a twinge of regret for not revealing her special forces background in detail. But she had always preferred anonymity. She wanted no special treatment or local gossip. Deep down, though, she sensed that if the Onyx Vipers decided to move in force, the sheriff's small department would be outmatched. And that meant the responsibility to defend her land and her kids would fall squarely on her shoulders. By the time Samantha returned to Whispering Pines Orchard, midday sun cast short shadows beneath the apple trees. She parked the truck near the cider press barn, listening to the crisp sounds of leaves rustling in a slight breeze. For a moment, the valley felt peaceful, as though the threat she sensed had drifted away with the wind. But the tension in her back refused to fade, and Scout's low, impatient bark broke the illusion of calm. Charlie was practicing setting up small irrigation lines, a chore Samantha had assigned to teach him responsibility. When he noticed her, his eyes lit up, reflecting that boyish enthusiasm she treasured. Mom, did Anthony have any news? She crouched down to scratch Scout behind the ears. The dog had been pacing near the barn door, occasionally looking off into the distance. Anthony confirmed some bikers were asking questions. Sheriff Delgado knows too. For now, everything's calm, but we have to be ready. Charlie pursed his lips, like he was trying to be braver than his 10-year-old self. Should we hide? I mean, the orchard is big. Maybe we can... She placed a hand on her son's shoulder. We're not hiding. We're just being prepared. Leaning closer, she added in a reassuring tone, "This is our home, Charlie. No one is taking it from us." Julia stepped out from the barn where she was labeling cider barrels for shipment. "Mom, I saw a couple of bikers riding by earlier. Maybe an hour ago. They didn't stop, but they slowed down right near our entrance. I wrote down their license plate numbers, just in case." "Good thinking," Samantha said, giving her daughter a faint smile that masked deeper worry. "Keep that list. We might need it if they come around again." Inside the cider press barn, Samantha took a moment to push a hidden latch behind a row of barrels. A section of wooden wall slid aside, revealing a concealed space about 4 feet wide and 8 feet tall. Within it stood a locked metal cabinet, which she opened with a key from around her neck. Her old sniper rifle, carefully oiled, rested inside. Along with the rifle were boxes of ammunition, a sidearm and gear she had once used for infiltration and reconnaissance. She stared at these tools, remembering the sense of duty and clarity that came with them. This was not a life she had ever wanted to revisit, especially in front of her children. But if push came to shove, she would do whatever it took to keep her family safe. Julia's voice echoed in from the barn's main area, telling Charlie something about the next wave of pressing they needed to do. Samantha gently closed the metal cabinet and slid the wall panel back in place. Quietly, she told herself that these onyx vipers would not back down without testing her resolve. She only hoped they would test it in a way that did not endanger the entire town. Because if she had to defend this orchard at gunpoint, she would, and she would do it without hesitation. 2 days passed without any direct confrontation, though Samantha spotted the black SUV twice more and saw different motorcycles cruising slowly by the orchard's main entrance. She tried to keep life as normal as possible for Julia and Charlie. They still did their chores, attended school, and helped around the orchard. Yet even Charlie sensed that tension crackled in the air like a distant thunderstorm. Julia seemed almost hyper-aware, glancing toward the road every time she heard an engine. On the third afternoon, Samantha decided to bake pies for the local diner. The orchard's apples had a bright, tart flavor that made them popular, and baking had always been her way of maintaining calm in the face of swirling uncertainty. Her mother once told her that focusing on a recipe's details could be like a soothing meditation, bridging the gap between chaos and order. So Samantha peeled apples, measured sugar and cinnamon, and kneaded homemade crust, all while her mind tallied security updates. New tire tracks on the far side of the property, a suspiciously parked vehicle near the highway turnoff. A group of unfamiliar riders rumored to be setting up in the next county. She was placing the last pie in the oven when her phone buzzed with a text from Anthony Wong. "Onyx Vipers at my store. Asking more questions. Might be heading your way." Samantha set aside the apron, adrenaline pooling in her veins. She walked outside and took up a discreet position by the tree line, scanning the main road with binoculars. Sure enough, a line of 5 motorbikes roared into view a few minutes later, led by a tall, broad-shouldered man whose vest bore a large silver and black cobra patch with the word Onyx emblazoned above it. He slowed the group right at her driveway. From Samantha's vantage point, she could see them clearly. Their leader lifted his helmet visor, revealing a deep scar that ran from temple to jaw. Crushing intensity glinted in his eyes, the look of someone who had no qualms about violence. This had to be Crusher, the one Anthony mentioned. He slid off his bike and gestured for the others to wait. The group let their engines idle, a reverberating growl that rattled through the orchard. It was a blatant show of intimidation, 5 heavy machines revving in the quiet serenity of farmland. Samantha set the binoculars aside, pulled her hair back into a practical ponytail, and approached them along the dirt drive. Her posture was relaxed, but each step was measured. She had faced warlords and mercenaries in foreign deserts. She would not be cowed by a group of biker enforcers in her own backyard. As she neared, she made note of each man's stance, scanning for concealed weapons, reading their body language the way a soldier interprets terrain. Crusher stared straight at her, arms crossed over his chest, lips parted in a thin, chilling smile. "Afternoon," Samantha said, letting her voice carry a polite yet no-nonsense edge. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The man with the scar took one step closer. "This your orchard?" he asked. His voice was gravelly, as though he gargled nails for breakfast. She simply nodded. "Yes, it is." "Then we need to talk about some business," he replied, the menace in his tone entirely unsubtle. The silence that followed Crusher's statement stretched under the high, cloudless sky. Samantha could almost feel the orchard's age-old energy, waiting to see how she would respond. Overhead, a pair of hawks circled, their cries lost beneath the low rumble of the motorbikes. One of the other riders, a lanky man with greasy hair and a patch that read "Snakebite," slid a foot forward as though itching to move closer. Samantha's gaze flicked briefly to him. She clocked the faint bulge under his vest and surmised he was carrying a sidearm. Another man to Crusher's right looked older, with pockmarked skin and a patch that read "Steel Claw." His stance was wide and stable. Maybe ex-military, or at least someone who knew how to handle a fight. Samantha's instincts told her these men had come prepared for violence, but they wanted to gauge her reaction before making a move. Still outwardly calm, she crossed her arms in mirror of Crusher's posture. "What sort of business do you have in mind?" Crusher unhooked his helmet and rested it on the seat of his bike. His scar looked even more pronounced in the afternoon light. "We've been expanding around these parts," he said in a voice that implied it was a statement of fact, rather than an opening for discussion. "A protection arrangement, you might say. Help small businesses stay safe from accidents." She raised a brow. "Accidents?" He nodded slowly, his gaze drifting toward the barn. "Fire, vandalism, theft. Lots of ways a place can run into trouble. We're ready to prevent all that. For a fee, of course." "Of course," Samantha replied, letting an edge of sarcasm slip into her tone. "And how much is this fee for your so-called protection?" Crusher's thin smile grew. "Let's say 1,000 a week to start. Considering the size of your orchard, I'd call that pretty generous. You pay us, we keep an eye out, and nothing unexpected happens." The audacity of his offer made Samantha's jaw tighten. "Appreciate your generosity," she said with a dryness that made Snakebite shift his feet uneasily. "But I'm not interested in paying for protection I don't need." Crusher's smile vanished, replaced by a hardness that made his eyes look like two lumps of coal. "You sure about that?" He inclined his head in a way that directed her to the orchard behind them. "Nice place. Be a shame if something or someone damaged it." Samantha inhaled slowly, controlling her temper. She was certain these men had done their research enough to guess she wasn't typical prey. Yet they saw only a single mother, presumably financially vulnerable, and they believed intimidation would be enough. "You're trespassing," she said calmly. "You should move along." For a beat, Crusher merely stared, as though he couldn't believe she had the nerve to dismiss him. Then he gave a curt laugh and started his bike engine. The others followed suit, though Steel Claw lingered a moment, giving Samantha a long, calculating look. When they finally pulled away, dust kicked up across the drive, and Samantha noted the direction they took. Straight back toward town. She stood there, fists clenched at her sides, knowing this was only the opening gambit. The Onyx Vipers had tested her willingness to fold under pressure. Her refusal now guaranteed a tougher response. Samantha gathered Julia and Charlie in the farmhouse kitchen later that evening, wanting them to understand the situation without scaring them unnecessarily. The sun had dipped below the mountains, painting the sky a fiery mix of orange and red. Over the years, this kitchen table had been a site of homework sessions, birthday celebrations, and quiet reading nights. Now it felt like a war council. Julia sat with her arms crossed, determined not to look afraid. "They just rode up here and threatened you?" she asked, eyes flashing with indignation. Charlie swallowed hard. "Are they going to come back and hurt us, Mom?" Samantha reached out to them both, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. "Listen, these guys are trouble. They want me to pay them money so they won't cause accidents. It's a scheme to take advantage of people who can't fight back." She made sure her voice stayed steady. "But we can fight back, or at least keep them from messing with us. I just need you both to do exactly what I say if things get rough." Julia straightened. "I can help. You've shown me some of your training, hand-to-hand stuff. I'm not a little kid anymore." While Samantha admired her daughter's spirit, she also feared for her safety. "Yes, you're strong, but these men are dangerous. If I tell you to run, you run. If I tell you to lock yourself in the storm shelter, that's what you do. You protect your brother, understood?" Julia nodded reluctantly, still brimming with anger at the violation of their peace. Charlie, meanwhile, glanced at Scout, who was sitting under the table. "Scout will bark if they come close, won't he?" Samantha allowed herself a small smile. Yes, Scout's a good early warning system, but I have more than a barking dog on our side. I have some old experience that might come in handy if they push me. The memory of her hidden sniper rifle, gear, and training flared in her mind. She had never explicitly told her children the full breadth of her Special Forces background, worried it might conjure nightmares for them. But they had grown up with glimpses of her habits, her vigilance, her preference to sit facing the door in any public place, the way she always knew the exact moment a storm front moved in. Now they were putting the pieces together in their own ways. The clock on the wall ticked ominously. Samantha pulled out a notepad, drawing a quick sketch of the orchard. She circled several spots: a shallow drainage ditch near the fence, a cluster of boulders by the old orchard, and a hidden footpath that wound to the creek. If something happens, she told them, go through the orchard to the creek bed. It's easier to stay out of sight there, and you can make it all the way to the Wong store without being spotted if you're careful. I'll join you if I can, but if I can't, you keep moving. Julia and Charlie listened attentively, the weight of the danger sobering them. When the conversation ended, neither child argued about early bedtime or chores. Samantha gazed at them as they walked away, hearts heavy. She let out a slow breath. If the Onyx Vipers forced her to engage, she would do what was necessary. A surge of that old protective resolve rose, reminding her exactly why she had left the Special Forces in the first place. Family first, at any cost. Just before dawn the next day, Samantha was up and moving, her senses extra attuned to the orchard's every sound. The moment the sky lightened from black to gray, she shrugged into a jacket and stepped out onto the porch, letting Scout trot ahead of her down the steps. The early morning stillness pressed in around them, broken only by faint bird calls. She whispered commands to Scout, shorthand signals that the dog responded to with disciplined focus. Samantha started at the northwest corner of her land, where the orchard's new fence gave way to a thick line of pines. Walking a deliberate perimeter, she made mental notes: footprints near a large rock, a newly broken branch that might indicate recent passage, an empty beer can pressed into the mud. The last item made her suspect that someone from the Onyx Vipers had been lurking. She took photos of everything on her phone, thankful for technology that let her document evidence as it appeared. By the time she completed her circuit, she felt certain that at least one or two intruders had tested the orchard boundary overnight. The scattered footprints and signs of tampering told a story. Whether they were planning sabotage or simply measuring her response, Samantha knew she needed an active plan, not just vigilance. In her Special Forces days, waiting passively for enemies to strike was a surefire way to lose. She had to either deter them effectively or launch a surprise of her own. But this was civilian life, and she was determined to give local authorities every chance to do their job first. Returning to the farmhouse, she placed a call to Sheriff Delgado, detailing the footprints and the beer can. "Do you have any volunteers or deputies you can spare to patrol at night?" she asked. "I'll pay overtime if needed." The sheriff's sigh carried across the line. "I'm already pushing my deputies to their limit, but I'll see if I can arrange a drive-by after midnight. Meanwhile, just keep a record of anything suspicious. If I get enough evidence, I might issue a warning to them. Though, to be honest, that might provoke them further." Samantha thanked him and ended the call, frustration hovering at the edges of her calm facade. How many signs of trespass and intimidation would it take for Delgado to act decisively? Even if he wanted to help, a small department with limited resources might be no match for a well-organized biker crew. The thought unsettled her, reigniting the strategic part of her mind that once specialized in bringing impossible missions to successful conclusions. She took a moment to calm herself with a deep breath. Then, stepping into the barn, she ran a hand along the hidden panel. If the Onyx Vipers wanted a show of force, she had the means to provide it, but she prayed it would not come to that. The orchard, after all, was supposed to be her family's peaceful haven, far from the chaos and violence of the life she had left behind. The Onyx Vipers' next move came in the form of a quiet but persistent rumor that swept through Bridgewater. Within 24 hours, half the town believed Samantha Alvarez was deeply in debt and on the verge of bankruptcy, that she had missed her mortgage payments, and that the orchard was teetering toward foreclosure. Anthony Wong, who heard the rumor from customers, immediately warned her. "Word on the street is that you can't pay your bills. Everyone's whispering that your orchard will be sold at auction soon." Samantha nearly choked on her coffee when Anthony relayed this over the phone. "That's impossible," she said calmly. "My mortgage is current, and the orchard's revenue is steady enough that I'm not hurting for cash right now." "That's not what people are hearing," Anthony replied grimly. "I suspect the Onyx Vipers are behind it, sowing misinformation to weaken your position. They want the town to think you're vulnerable." Indeed, it was a typical strong-arm tactic. By spreading rumors, the gang could create a narrative where Samantha was in dire straits, so that when they arrived with an offer, perhaps to buy the property or assume the mortgage, locals might see it as salvation rather than a hostile takeover. Samantha recognized the playbook. The question was how to counter it. She considered calling the local newspaper or even printing out her financial statements for people to see. Yet confronting rumors head-on in a small town often backfired, fueling more gossip. She decided on a different approach. That evening, she visited the Bridgewater Diner where many locals gathered for supper. With Julia and Charlie by her side, she casually mentioned to a few acquaintances that she'd been shipping out fresh cider orders to a new grocer 3 counties over. She also talked about the orchard's healthy upcoming harvest. Without directly addressing the rumors, she laid the foundation that her finances were solid. The more she relayed normal, everyday successes, the more people would question the rumor that she was going bankrupt. Meanwhile, as dust settled over the town, Samantha noticed a trio of bikers parked across the street, watching the diner. Crusher was not among them, but Snakebite was. He locked eyes with her once through the plate glass window, smirking confidently as though everything were going according to plan. Samantha returned his stare, refusing to show fear. The tension weighed heavily in the air, and Julia caught it, nudging her mother. Samantha simply shook her head, letting her daughter know not to react. When the Alvarez family left the diner, they did so calmly, stopping to chat with neighbors while ignoring the bikers altogether. As they piled into the truck, Samantha drove home without incident, though she was keenly aware the motorcycles followed at a distance. They turned off somewhere halfway to the orchard, possibly just letting her know they were there. That night, Samantha sat on her porch, a loaded shotgun resting across her lap under a wool blanket. She listened to the crickets and stared at the dark ribbon of road leading up to her property. These Onyx Vipers wanted a psychological war, seeding rumors and trying to make her look weak. She hoped her refusal to be rattled would buy her time to gather allies. Because if diplomacy failed, she knew from experience that brute force would follow. In the calm light of early morning, Samantha made a decision. She needed a more organized defense. While she trusted Sheriff Delgado's good intentions, she also recognized the deep flaws in relying solely on official law enforcement. The orchard was large, the gang was cunning, and the gossip swirling around her finances threatened to isolate her from the community. A direct show of force or confrontation might only escalate things and put Julia and Charlie in danger. So she called Ethan Brooks, the local mechanic, and one of the few people in Bridgewater she knew had a military background. She had seen the slight limp in his walk, learned he'd lost part of his left leg in Afghanistan. He wore a prosthetic now, but carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced real conflict. Ethan picked up on the third ring. "Samantha," he said in a cautious tone, "I heard there's been talk about your orchard." She exhaled slowly. "That's putting it mildly. I think you know the kind of trouble these Onyx Vipers can stir up. I need an extra set of eyes, and maybe more." There was a pause. "I'm listening." Later that morning, Ethan arrived at Whispering Pines in his old pickup, pulling up next to the barn with a determined look in his eyes. The orchard was alive with the usual hustle of daily tasks. Julia sorting apples for cider, Charlie cleaning out a chicken coop, and the mechanical hum of the press. Samantha guided Ethan to a shady spot under a towering pine tree where they could speak privately. She briefly outlined the attempts at intimidation, the rumored financial ruin, and the footprints she'd found at the perimeter. Ethan frowned, rolling his shoulders as though preparing for a mission. "I've seen these tactics in smaller villages overseas. Gangs show up pretending to offer protection, then bleed people dry. Eventually, the property owners either leave or become part of the racket." Samantha nodded. "Exactly. I'm not leaving, so I'm afraid they'll escalate." Ethan studied her for a moment, his gaze flicking over the orchard's tidy rows of trees and the structure of the barn. "You've done some pretty solid reinforcing," he observed. "I can guess that's not standard for a cider operation." She gave a non-committal shrug. "I had Some training before I settled here. Figured I'd be prepared for trouble. A respectful look passed between them. Neither asked direct questions about the other's service, but the mutual understanding was clear. We should plan a perimeter watch, Ethan offered. I can help you create deterrence. Maybe motion lights, cameras, discrete lines of sight. If they realize you're not an easy target, they might think twice. Samantha silently approved of his measured approach. Sometimes overt aggression could provoke an early assault, but subtle signs of a strong defense could make enemies more cautious. Let's do it, she agreed, at least until these guys decide to move on. They spent the next few hours walking the orchard, discussing vantage points, potential ambush zones, and safe pathways for her children. If the Onyx Vipers thought Samantha was just a lonely orchard keeper ripe for the picking, they were about to discover that this quiet piece of farmland was more securely guarded than it looked. The new security measures came together faster than Samantha anticipated. Ethan was an expert at rigging makeshift alarm systems from everyday items. Fishing line, tin cans, old radio parts. They started by placing small, nearly invisible lines around key entries. The main drive near the orchard gate, the rear fence by the creek, and a narrow path that cut through a stand of pines on the western edge. When triggered, these lines would set off a simple clatter of cans, enough to alert Samantha or whomever was on watch. For more advanced surveillance, they used battery-powered motion detector lights mounted discreetly on fence posts. Samantha purchased a few off-the-shelf trail cameras designed for hunters, which Ethan tweaked to enhance their night vision. They also coordinated a nightly rotation, trading off so that at least one of them would be awake between the hours of midnight and sunrise. Julia volunteered to cover a few early hours with a pair of binoculars from her bedroom window, but Samantha limited her role, both to keep Julia safe and to ensure she maintained a normal teenage life, as much as possible. In the midst of all this, the orchard still had to function. Orders for cider, pies, and fresh apples continued, and Samantha found herself juggling a near-constant stream of activity. Harvest season loomed. Normally, she would hire a few part-timers to help with picking and pressing, but with the Onyx Vipers breathing down her neck, she hesitated to bring strangers onto the property. Trust became a scarce commodity overnight. The rumor mill in Bridgewater kept churning, some folks privately asking if she planned to sell the orchard. She denied it politely each time, but she could see uncertainty in their eyes. Could a single mother really stand up to a biker gang? Meanwhile, Anthony Wong called daily with updates. The Onyx Vipers had begun shaking down other businesses. A local motel owner had faced a similar protection fee demand, though he had tried to pay them off quietly, hoping it would keep them from escalating. Of course, once the gang knew he would pay, they increased their asking price. Another family who operated a small ranch just north of the valley reported slashed fences and missing livestock. Day by day, the Vipers tightened their grip on the region, and people whispered that maybe paying them off was the only way to keep the peace. Ethan and Samantha had different ideas. After a week of improved security drills, Ethan pulled out a battered old notebook over coffee at the farmhouse. He showed Samantha a set of notes about how insurgent groups overseas had been effectively countered when locals banded together. If people around here realize that the orchard isn't backing down, maybe they'll be inspired to do the same, he suggested. Gangs like these rely on dividing communities through fear. Samantha rubbed her temples. I want to help, but this orchard is my main concern. If I go around telling people to pick up arms, that might make me look like a vigilante or a troublemaker. And if the sheriff doesn't want us to escalate? Ethan shrugged. We don't need to go riling people up. Maybe we just need to show them you won't fold. That might be enough of a spark. Because if you stand firm here, and the Onyx Vipers can't break you, it sends a clear message to everyone else in Bridgewater. These bullies aren't invincible. Samantha mulled that over. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. She had moved here to escape conflict, not incite it, but she also knew that surrender wasn't an option. Her kids depended on her resolve. Quietly, she looked out the window, watching Julia coax Charlie into practicing his reading. Scouts lay at their feet, dozing contentedly. Her orchard was worth defending at all costs, and if that meant using her old training, so be it. Late on a moonless night, Samantha and Ethan conducted their first real test of the orchard's new defense systems. They had parted ways after dinner, each pretending to settle in for the evening. Julia and Charlie were already asleep upstairs, but Samantha had asked them to keep their curtains cracked open in case they needed to see movement outside. Around midnight, Samantha slipped out of bed, dressed in dark, non-reflective clothing, and retrieved her old sniper rifle from its hidden compartment in the barn. She and Ethan communicated via small earpieces, cheap walkie-talkie sets they had purchased at a sporting goods store, but modified for improved range. They planned a 2-hour watch, scanning the orchard's perimeter, to see if any suspicious movement triggered the alarm lines or motion lights. Samantha settled into a concealed vantage point near the orchard's western ridge, while Ethan took up position near the barn loft, which overlooked much of the eastern and southern fields. The night air was crisp, scented with pine and ripening apples. No wind stirred the branches, making every noise stand out. Samantha could hear the rhythmic chirping of crickets, occasionally interrupted by the distant howling of a coyote. Through her scope, she swept the perimeter, the rifle's night vision attachment transforming the darkness into a wash of greenish light. Each row of trees looked eerily still, their leaves shining faintly under the starlight. She spotted no sign of intruders, only the subtle shapes of deer wandering through the tall grass at the far edge of the property. "Any movement near you?" Ethan's voice crackled softly in her earpiece. "Nothing," Samantha replied in a near whisper. "Just wildlife." "Same here," he said. "I'll do another quick look at the north fence line, then meet you by the creek path in 20. Samantha allowed her body to relax just slightly. Part of her had expected a confrontation tonight. Maybe the Vipers were not as bold as she imagined, or maybe they were waiting for a bigger show of force. In any case, she was determined not to let her guard down. After completing one more slow, deliberate scan, she began to maneuver toward the creek. She moved silently, a skill she'd perfected in the military, rolling her foot from heel to toe, avoiding snapping twigs, keeping her center of gravity balanced. In the hush of the orchard, her steps were as faint as a whisper. When she arrived at the creek, she crouched behind a large boulder and waited. The reflection of stars shimmered on the water's surface. Moments later, she spotted Ethan's figure emerging from the darkness, walking with practiced caution despite his prosthetic. He raised a hand in a silent greeting, and she nodded. The orchard was, for now, secure. They spoke briefly in hushed tones. "Seems clear tonight," Samantha said. "I'm hoping that's a sign they're backing off." Ethan frowned. "Or planning something bigger. Don't let a quiet night fool you. Crusher and his men might be scoping out other easy targets, or waiting for you to lower your guard before they strike." She agreed wholeheartedly. "Let's not get complacent. Tomorrow I'll talk to Anthony again, see if the rumor mill has changed. If the Vipers are hitting other businesses, that might give us time to reinforce further." Their conversation ended, and they parted ways, each heading back toward their chosen watch spot for another half hour. Samantha's heart felt heavy as she realized her orchard, once a symbol of serenity, had become a tactical zone. Yet as she lifted her rifle to scan the horizon one last time, she found a small measure of hope. The orchard was defended by more than fences and cameras. It was protected by people ready to stand firm. And that, Samantha reflected, could be more powerful than any intimidation campaign the Onyx Vipers could mount. Morning light spilled into the kitchen as Samantha Alvarez turned on the radio, hoping for a weather update and perhaps a sense of calm routine. Though the orchard seemed peaceful in the hazy glow of dawn, she knew how quickly appearances could shift. A night of quiet didn't guarantee safety. She stirred a spoon in her coffee, scanning headlines for any mention of a biker gang or trouble in Bridgewater Valley. But the local station only discussed an upcoming county fair and a fundraiser for the volunteer fire department. No official word on the Onyx Vipers, but that came as little surprise. They operated in shadows, preferring intimidation and rumors over open confrontation, at least until they were ready to strike. Julia entered with her hair still damp from a shower. "Mom, are you heading into town later? Mr. Wong called and said they're short-staffed at the store. He's offering me extra hours if I can come after school." Samantha glanced over, considering. She wanted to keep Julia safely at the orchard, away from potential run-ins with the bikers. But she also recognized that life had to go on. Julia needed normalcy, and the last thing Samantha wanted was to make her daughter a prisoner on their own land. "All right," she replied. "You can work, but I'll drive you there and pick you up right after. No hanging around town alone." Julia nodded, understanding that her mother's protective streak had valid reasons. "Deal. I promise to text you if anything seems off." Meanwhile, Charlie clattered down the stairs with Scout on his heels. "Morning," he called, plopping into a chair. At 10, he still had that boundless energy that made Samantha smile despite her worries. She served him a plate of scrambled eggs, mentally reviewing the orchard tasks for the day, harvesting a late summer apple variety, repairing a faulty irrigation line, and scanning for any new signs of tampering at the property's perimeter. "Once you finish breakfast," Samantha told Charlie, "head out and check the irrigation near the west fence. Any leaks we find now will save us trouble down the line." Charlie gave a mock salute. "Yes, ma'am." Scout perked up, as if he also received the order. As the morning routine continued, Julia double-checking her backpack for school, Charlie digging for mismatched socks, Samantha juggling orchard operations. Ethan Brooks pulled into the driveway with a supply of PVC tubing for the irrigation repairs. Samantha walked out to meet him, noticing the telltale fatigue in his eyes. He admitted he hadn't slept well, worried about how easy it might be for the bikers to coordinate attacks while playing the part of casual tourists. Together, they unloaded the tubing and stored it in the barn. "If they plan something," Ethan said, leaning against his truck, "they'll likely wait until they have the advantage in numbers or timing. These gangs don't usually attack full force in broad daylight. More likely, they'd pull a strike late at night when we're exhausted, unless they think scaring folks in public will speed things up." His gaze flicked toward Julia, who was giving Charlie a last-minute pep talk on test-taking before school. Samantha caught his meaning. "We stay vigilant," she said, "but we keep living our lives." Shortly after sunrise, the orchard hummed with familiar sounds. The pump near the barn chugging water, the buzz of insects in the rows of apple trees, the rustle of leaves in a soft breeze. Samantha wanted to believe this was a normal day, but tension lay just beneath the surface. Every time a motorcycle engine echoed in the distance, her senses sharpened. She told herself it might only be a random rider passing by, yet experience had taught her to trust that low-level hum of apprehension. By late morning, she finished troubleshooting the irrigation system, checking the lines for blockages. Charlie followed, holding tools and pipes as needed. The boy was learning quickly, taking pride in each small achievement, like patching a leak with epoxy or realigning a sprinkler head. His eyes roamed the orchard, though, as if expecting a black SUV or a cluster of motorbikes to appear at any moment. Samantha offered a reassuring nod, trying to convey confidence without giving in to fear. When the clock struck noon, she wrapped up the repairs and looked toward the farmhouse. Julia would already be at school, and Ethan had gone into town for supplies. A pang of loneliness nudged Samantha. It reminded her of her time overseas, those moments between missions when she stood in foreign fields, scanning for threats while everyone else seemed to live life carefree. She shoved the memory aside and returned to the barn. The old wooden press creaked as she inspected it. The orchard's biggest harvest would come in about a month, and everything needed to be in perfect working order. That was when she heard a low rumble. 1, 2, then 3 motorcycles approaching. Her heart thumped. She set down a wrench, wiping her hands on a rag as she stepped out of the barn. The bikes pulled into her driveway, each rider clad in the Onyx Viper's signature black and silver vest. None were Crusher, Snakebite, or Steel Claw. These appeared to be younger recruits. Still, their expressions and body language suggested they were here for business, not a friendly hello. Samantha planted herself by the barn door, crossing her arms. "You're on private property," she called. "Is there something you need?" The tallest of the 3, a lanky man with a shaved head, removed his helmet. "Boss wants to talk to you," he said in a flat voice. "Says it's time to reconsider his offer." Her lips tightened. "And where is your boss?" "Waiting in town," another rider chimed in. "He doesn't appreciate being turned down, especially by someone who thinks they can handle all this alone." He jerked his chin at the orchard behind her. "He's giving you one more chance to make a deal. Otherwise, accidents happen." Samantha resisted the urge to roll her eyes, though she felt her anger ignite like a spark on dry tinder. How many times would they try the same intimidation routine? "If your boss wants to talk, he can come himself. I'm not going anywhere." They exchanged a glance. "Fine," said the shaved-headed biker, "but he won't be so polite next time." "Is that what this is?" Samantha asked quietly. "You call this polite?" He glowered. "You'll see what not polite looks like if you keep refusing." With that, all three kicked up their stands and revved their engines, letting dust swirl in a dramatic, if somewhat ridiculous exit. Samantha watched them roar off, heart pounding. This was the harbinger of a bigger storm. They were escalating their demands, likely because the rumor campaign hadn't coerced her into selling. She set her jaw and turned back to the barn, determined to match their escalation with her own unwavering resolve. Ethan returned that afternoon, parking his truck with a squeal of brakes that drew Samantha out of the barn. He hopped out, his prosthetic leg moving fluidly. She noticed the tight lines in his face, a sure sign he had encountered trouble in town. "Ran into a couple of the Onyx guys at the hardware store," Ethan said, his voice low. "They made a point of asking if I was working with you. Then one of them said, 'If you're fixing that orchard, you'd better make sure it's fireproof.'" Ha ha ha, just loud enough for the clerk to hear. Samantha grimaced, fear mixing with a sharp bolt of anger. "They threatened arson, basically." "Yeah, basically." The clerk pretended not to notice, but I could tell he was on edge. Ethan took a shaky breath. "Look, I've seen how these gangs operate. If intimidation doesn't work, they do something big, something to scare the whole town into compliance. It might be a fire, or a severe case of vandalism, or even a targeted attack on a family member." She frowned at that last possibility. "Julia and Charlie can't become pawns in this. I won't allow it." He nodded grimly. "I know. We need a plan that covers every angle. If they hit you at night, we can defend. But what if they choose a weekday afternoon, when Julia's at the store and Charlie's in school? They could corner them away from the orchard." Samantha's stomach churned. She recalled countless scenarios from her Special Forces days. Hostage situations, infiltration missions, rescue operations. The idea that her children might be used as leverage made her blood run cold. She had to protect them at all costs. "I can pull Julia from her job and arrange for Charlie to stay close to the orchard when he's not in class," she said slowly. "But I don't want them living in fear. That's exactly what the Vipers want." Ethan glanced around the yard. "Maybe you should talk to the sheriff again. See if he can assign a deputy to patrol the school or the store." "I did already. Delgado's understaffed," Samantha replied bitterly. "But I'll ask again. Meanwhile, the orchard is our fortress. We fortify further, and we set up protocols for the kids. If they spot trouble in town, they'll have a safe route and a place to hide until we can get to them." "Agreed. I can show Charlie some basic evasion tactics," Ethan offered. "Nothing that'd put him at risk, just ways to slip away unnoticed and get to cover." The suggestion was both comforting and sad. Her children were learning the skills of survival, not because of some foreign war, but right here in their home community. Samantha steeled herself. "Yes, do it. And I'll have a talk with Julia tonight. She's old enough to grasp what's going on." They walked to the farmhouse together, the weight of the orchard's silence pressing on them. The threat of arson, of seeing everything she had built go up in flames, loomed like a dark omen. Samantha tried to reassure herself that she could outmaneuver these bullies. She had done far more dangerous things before, but that was in another life, under different rules. Now she wasn't alone, and the stakes felt infinitely higher. For the first time, she sensed the terrifying possibility that no matter how resourceful she was, the Onyx Vipers might wreak enough havoc to break the spirit of Bridgewater Valley and shatter her family's life for good. Julia stepped off the school bus that afternoon and walked into the orchard, backpack slung over one shoulder. She found Samantha and Ethan chatting near a partially disassembled irrigation system. With teenaged intuition, she caught their hushed tone and tense expressions immediately. "Is it the bikers again?" she asked, dropping her bag beside a crate of apples. "Because everyone at school is talking about them. Some of my classmates say the Onyx Vipers have been loitering outside the pizza place, acting all menacing. Mr. Whitman, our principal, even mentioned them during the morning announcements, warning us to stay out of trouble." Samantha nodded, wiping sweat from her brow. "Yeah, it's getting more public. They showed up here again too. Said Crusher wants another conversation." She avoided details that would scare Julia more than necessary, but her daughter was too sharp to miss the implications. "So what's the plan?" Julia's chin tilted up defiantly. Ethan cleared his throat. "We're looking at ways to reinforce safety measures. In case they try something drastic, like vandalism or worse, We want everyone prepared. Julia puffed out a breath. I hate this. We moved here to have a peaceful life. Now it feels like we're in some action movie. Samantha placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. I know it's not fair, but we need your help, Jules. We need you to be extra observant and ready to follow instructions if things get dangerous. Understand? Julia's gaze flicked between her mother and Ethan. Then she nodded, shoulders tightening with resolve. If they think they can scare us into hiding, they've picked the wrong family. Atta girl, Ethan said with a small grin. Still, let's be smart about it. Don't go anywhere alone if you can avoid it. Stick with friends who can run for help. Keep your phone charged. Simple precautions. Julia agreed, though Samantha could see her frustration simmering below the surface. She wondered how much to tell her daughter about the orchard's hidden weapons or her own special forces background. The less Julia knew, the safer she might be if the bikers confronted her directly. On the other hand, the girl was old enough to sense her mother's capabilities. She might even expect a more forceful response than what Samantha had shown so far. As the afternoon wore on, Samantha and Julia tackled the orchard task together. Charlie joined them after finishing his homework, bounding around with Scout by his side. They checked the lines Ethan had fixed, pruned a few branches, and loaded crates of apples for partial processing. The entire time Samantha's mind thrummed with contingency plans. She mapped out the orchard's choke points, where an adversary would have to cross open ground. She mentally rehearsed how quickly she could retrieve her rifle from the hidden cabinet, load it, and take position. But she also recognized the cost of all this vigilance. Julia's face, once carefree when walking among the apple trees, now carried a hint of watchfulness. Charlie, though he put on a brave front, jumped at sudden noises. Even Scout seemed restless, pacing the perimeter. We'll protect this place, Samantha told herself, as though speaking an oath. Yet with each passing day, she felt the tension coil tighter around them all. The orchard had become both sanctuary and battleground, and no one, especially not the Onyx Vipers, would be allowed to dictate its future, but her. Sheriff Delgado came out to the orchard late that week, driving a dusty patrol car that clearly needed new shocks. Samantha met him at the gate. He took off his hat, looking both apologetic and concerned. Behind him, the silhouette of Ethan's truck loomed in the driveway, and further back, Julia and Charlie sat on the porch, quietly keeping an eye on the conversation. Ms. Alvarez, Delgado began, I've been meaning to get out here sooner, but we've had a rash of minor thefts and complaints around town. Seems the Onyx Vipers are stirring up trouble in different corners, but none of it crosses the line into serious felony territory. Hard to pin anything on them directly. Samantha forced a polite smile. I appreciate you stopping by at all. I understand your department's constraints, but they came to my orchard again, making threats, and I'm worried they'll escalate further. Delgado pursed his lips. I've got 2 deputies, one on medical leave, and a reserve deputy who's juggling another job. I can't put a protective detail out here 24/7, but I can do extra patrols around dusk and dawn. Let's just hope that deters them. Her frustration simmered. She had hoped for more tangible support, maybe a thorough investigation or direct confrontation. But Delgado's hands were tied by limited manpower and a system that required clear evidence before action. I do appreciate what you can do, she said. Just be aware that if they escalate, I'll defend my property and my family. Delgado's gaze held hers, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. I don't doubt your resolve or ability. Just be careful. The Vipers are known for retaliating hard when pushed. His voice dropped as he stepped closer. Listen, there's also word that Crusher, real name Brant Cushing, is ex-military, maybe dishonorably discharged, so he might be more formidable than your average biker. Samantha's chest tightened. An ex-military gangster meant the odds of a coordinated assault were much higher. Still, she managed an even reply. Thank you for the heads up, Sheriff. With that, Delgado replaced his hat and returned to his car, promising to circle back around near dusk. Samantha watched him drive away, dust trailing on the gravel road. She felt a surge of conflicting emotions, gratitude for the man's honesty, anger at his limitations, and renewed determination to handle this herself if need be. Ethan came out from behind the barn, having overheard part of the conversation. I caught that bit about Crusher being ex-military, he said, eyes shadowed by concern. We might be dealing with someone who knows formal tactics. That changes the equation. Samantha nodded. I suspected as much when they first showed up. They move like they've had some training. Their intimidation style is too systematic. Julia and Charlie ambled over from the porch, curiosity in their expressions. Is everything okay? Julia ventured. Sheriff just confirmed we're dealing with bigger threats, Samantha said plainly. We'll keep doing what we must, but I want you both to remain extra careful. Charlie looked from Ethan to Samantha, brow knitted. If this Crusher guy is so dangerous, why doesn't the sheriff just lock him up? Ethan sighed. Because criminals like that know how to work around the law until they're ready to show their hand. We have to be vigilant. We'll protect each other. Though Charlie's eyes showed a flicker of fear, he gave a determined nod. Samantha's heart ached, wishing her children never had to grow up in the shadow of violence. But if Crusher wanted a battle, he would get one, just not the way he expected. Samantha woke in the pre-dawn darkness, an uneasy feeling gnawing at her. She slipped out of bed, threw on a jacket and boots, and made her way outside, shotgun resting lightly in her hands. The orchard was quiet, the sky just beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn. The air felt still, too still. She circled the farmhouse, then the barn, scanning for footprints or signs of forced entry. Scout trailed her with ears perked, occasionally letting out a low growl. In the faint half-light, she spotted a piece of paper taped to the barn door. With caution, she approached, checking for any booby traps. Nothing suspicious. She snatched the note free, her pulse quickening as she read the scrawled words. Last chance to cooperate. By the weekend, if you don't pay, you lose it all. The handwriting was jagged, as if the author had forced the pen into the paper with rage. No signature, but none was needed. Ethan arrived just after sunrise, finding Samantha in the barn polishing an old revolver. She handed him the note without a word. He let out a low whistle. They're running out of patience. The weekend is 3 days away. She set the revolver aside. We need to finalize the orchard's defenses. If they come in numbers, we have to guide them where we want them. Away from the house, away from the kids, and into a position we can control. Ethan retrieved a hand-drawn map of the property. I've been thinking about that. If we plan choke points here and here, he tapped the map, we can funnel them into open ground. You'd be able to cover them from the roof of the barn or from that elevated ridge behind the orchard. Samantha nodded thoughtfully. The orchard rows themselves can be a maze if we know them better than they do. With some strategic lighting and a few spiked planks or wire barricades, we can slow their approach at night. They spent the next several hours quietly setting up these defenses. Wooden barriers disguised under piles of brush, deterrent lines of barbed wire near vulnerable fence sections, even a few alarm systems rigged to release bright flares if triggered. All the while, Julia and Charlie attended school, and Samantha juggled orchard work, phone calls with potential cider buyers, and a mounting sense of dread. She hated turning her peaceful orchard into a tactical playground, but the onyx vipers left her no choice. That evening, as the sky darkened, Samantha gathered Ethan, Julia, and Charlie around the kitchen table. She explained the new security measures in simple terms, carefully skipping over any gruesome possibilities. If there's trouble, the alarms will let us know. We'll meet in the barn if we can, or the storm shelter if it's too dangerous. Julia, you can handle a walkie-talkie to coordinate with me or Ethan. Charlie, your job is to stay with Scout and keep your phone on, no matter what. The children exchanged uneasy looks. Julia bit her lip. So we're really preparing for a fight. Samantha locked eyes with her daughter. I hope it doesn't come to that, sweetheart. But if it does, we'll be ready. She couldn't say it aloud, but she knew that if Crusher attempted an all-out assault, he'd discover too late that he wasn't the only one with military experience. And unlike him, Samantha was fighting for something far more precious than ego or power. She was fighting for her home, her children, and everything that made Whispering Pines Orchard a refuge worth defending. Thursday slipped into Friday without any direct action from the Onyx Vipers, which made Samantha all the more uneasy. She knew a threat with a clear deadline, by the weekend, could manifest at any moment. In her Special Forces days, the lull before an attack often unsettled her more than the battle itself. Adrenaline spiked unpredictably, nerves grated, and every small sound morphed into the potential start of a skirmish. By mid-afternoon, Ethan drove off to pick up Julia, from her part-time shift at the general store, promising to watch her back in case the bikers tried anything on the drive home. Charlie practiced baseball swings behind the barn, whacking a foam ball into a makeshift net. Samantha patrolled the perimeter, arms tensed around her rifle. She felt a fleeting pang of guilt that Charlie was living this strange half-life, playing one moment, vigilant the next. But at least he was still smiling, unaware of how severe things might soon become. Late in the day, a lone motorcycle approached, stopping just beyond the orchard gate. Samantha observed from a distance, rifle at her side. The rider wore the Onyx Viper's vest and removed his helmet slowly, scanning the property. He didn't try to enter. He simply stared, then revved the engine and peeled away, kicking up dust behind him. Another warning? Or just reconnaissance? When Ethan returned with Julia, they shared an update. Crusher was in town, along with at least a dozen other bikers, huddled near the diner. Some rode through side streets talking to business owners. Others simply loitered, their presence a heavy cloud over Bridgewater. People whispered that the sheriff had spoken to them, but left frustrated by their evasive half-answers. The tension climbed as twilight fell over the orchard. Samantha, Julia, and Charlie prepared a quick dinner of sandwiches. No one had much appetite, but they forced themselves to eat. They needed their strength, especially if the night brought unwelcome visitors. After dinner, Samantha set up the watch schedule with Ethan. Julia asked if she could stay up for the first shift, anxious to help. Samantha reluctantly agreed, allowing her an hour by the barn loft window with a pair of binoculars, under strict instructions to wake her at the slightest sign of trouble. Time passed slowly. 9 o'clock, 10, then 11. Samantha tried to rest on the living room couch, fully clothed, a loaded pistol on the table within reach. The orchard was eerily silent. No motorcycle engines, no barking dogs, not even the typical hoot of an owl. The hush pressed on Samantha's ears, making her hyper-aware of every small noise, her own breathing, the ticking clock on the wall. A few minutes after midnight, Julia's soft footsteps creaked on the stairs. Samantha sat up instantly. Her daughter appeared, eyes wide. "Mom, something's moving by the fence. Could be an animal, but it might not be." Heart pounding, Samantha stood, pistol in hand. "Where's Ethan?" "He's by the barn outside. I just saw him head that way with a flashlight." Without another word, Samantha motioned for Julia to stay with Charlie, who was already asleep in his room, and hurried toward the barn. The orchard lights were off to maintain darkness as an ally. Samantha slipped through the shadows like a wraith, heart thumping with the focused clarity of her old operations. If the Onyx Vipers had come, she'd make sure they left with a new understanding of what it meant to threaten her land. Samantha found Ethan standing at the edge of the orchard, a flashlight in one hand, his other hovering near a holstered gun. Moonlight revealed fresh tracks in the soft earth beyond the fence. They looked like footprints, or two, maybe three individuals, who had tried to creep along the perimeter undetected. Based on their spacing, they moved methodically, pausing at intervals as if searching for something. "They might be checking for a weak spot in the fence," Ethan whispered, shining the beam on a section of wire that had been tugged loose. "I think they realized we reinforced it. They gave up prying and moved on." Samantha scanned the darkness. "Could still be nearby. Maybe they retreated when they realized we were onto them." Ethan nodded. "I'll circle around the far side in case they're trying to flank us." He gripped Samantha's shoulder briefly, a silent affirmation of teamwork, then disappeared among the orchard rows. Alone now, Samantha crouched behind a pine tree to watch the open field. She strained her ears for footsteps, breathing, or hushed voices. Instead, she heard only the faint rustle of a breeze and the distant chirp of crickets. She remained there for a solid 15 minutes, rifle at the ready, but found no sign of intruders. Eventually, she traced the footprints along the fence line until they vanished into a patch of weeds near a shallow ditch. Whoever had been there was gone, leaving behind only fresh prints and a mild sense of accomplishment that they had tested her defenses. When she got back to the barn, Ethan reappeared. "No one on the other side," he confirmed, wiping sweat from his brow. "If it was them, they must have pulled back fast." Samantha exhaled, tension still coiled in her gut. "Or they're watching us watch them, waiting for a better chance." She hated the cat-and-mouse dynamic, each side probing, neither committing to a full confrontation. At some point, someone would cross a line, and she prayed it would be on her terms. They reconvened with Julia in the loft, where she stood by the window, binoculars pressed to her face. The girl looked nervous but determined, scanning the property for any sign of movement. When Samantha told her the intruders seemed to have slipped away, Julia's shoulders relaxed, though her eyes remained alert. "This is only the beginning, isn't it?" Her mother nodded, wishing she could promise otherwise. "We're ready," she said. "They tested us tonight and found we're not easy prey. That might discourage them, or it might make them come back in greater force. Either way, we keep our guard up." By 1 in the morning, the orchard was quiet again. Samantha insisted Julia get some sleep. Ethan took a shift dozing in the loft while Samantha went back to the farmhouse to ensure Charlie was safe. He lay in bed, one arm curled around Scout, who dozed peacefully. Gently, Samantha brushed hair from Charlie's forehead, feeling both relief and a protective surge of love so strong it nearly overwhelmed her. She didn't sleep the rest of that night. Instead, she watched from the living room window, pistol within arm's reach, mind-conjuring every possible scenario for the weekend deadline. Though the orchard held still under the moonlight, Samantha understood they were in the eye of a gathering storm. The onyx vipers had tested the fence. Next time, they might test her resolve more directly, and she intended to show them exactly what she was capable of. Dawn arrived with a sky streaked in pale blues and pinks, but Samantha felt no comfort in the beauty. The orchard awakened to a normal bustle, the distant cluck of hens, the rustle of apple branches in a gentle breeze, and the persistent hum of the irrigation pump. Yet beneath this pastoral calm lay the memory of footprints by the fence. Over breakfast, Ethan recounted the evening's events to Julia and Charlie in a matter-of-fact tone, leaving out the more alarming details. "We found a couple sets of tracks near the north fence," Ethan explained, sipping coffee at the kitchen table. "No real damage, just some tampering. If you hear anything suspicious at night, let us know right away." Charlie gulped his milk, eyes wide. "What if they come when you're asleep?" Samantha rested a hand on his shoulder. "We take turns on watch, and we have Scout to alert us. Plus, we have the alarm lines. Remember, we're prepared. They're not going to catch us off guard." Julia wore a thoughtful frown. "They keep poking around, but they never do anything big. It's like they're building up to something." "I think they're waiting for the perfect time," Ethan agreed. "Crusher probably wants to show up with enough men and firepower to intimidate us into surrender without a prolonged fight." Samantha's jaw tightened. Surrender was not an option. "Let him gather men," she said quietly. "If he underestimates us, that'll be his mistake." Soon after breakfast, the usual orchard chores claimed much of the morning. Samantha worked with Julia to sort apples for pressing, while Ethan helped Charlie repair a small chicken coop that had lost a side panel. This sense of normalcy offered a brief reprieve. The orchard was, at its heart, still a place of growth, family, and honest labor. Samantha let herself enjoy that for a moment, showing Charlie how to hammer nails properly without bending them. The boy was all concentration, enthralled by the idea of building something sturdy. She couldn't help but think how unfair it was that the shadow of violence threatened to rob him of such innocence. Shortly after noon, a visitor arrived. Dr. Mara Singh, the local veterinarian who occasionally advised Samantha on livestock issues. She was a tall woman with a kind smile and keen eyes. She approached cautiously, having heard rumors about the orchard's trouble. Samantha greeted her at the gate, rifle slung over her shoulder. "Just thought I'd drop by," Mara said, "to check on that brood of hens I vaccinated last month and to see how you're holding up. The town's full of talk about the onyx vipers." Samantha offered a weary smile. "We're holding steady for now. Appreciate you coming by. I'll show you the hens." As they walked, Mara glanced around at the new security measures: barbed wire near the fence, hidden alarm lines, boarded up windows on the barn's lower level. "This place has changed since I was here last. You've turned it into a fortress." "Better safe than sorry," Samantha replied, leaving it at that. They reached the chicken coop, where Mara examined a few hens and noted their general health. In a low voice, she confided, "I've heard from some ranchers on the east side of the valley. They're being pressured too. I'm worried the bikers might do something drastic to prove their power if people keep resisting. Bridges burned, livestock killed. It wouldn't be the first time." Samantha swallowed. "I know. I'm doing all I can to prevent that." Mara finished her inspection, then rested a gentle hand on Samantha's arm. "If there's anything else you need, someone to transport supplies, Or keep an eye on your kids if things get hairy. Let me know. We all have to look out for each other." The kindness in her words warmed Samantha's guarded heart. "Thank you, Mara. It means a lot." The vet left soon after, promising to check back in a week. Samantha stared at her retreating vehicle, realizing that despite the looming threat, people in Bridgewater were rallying around her orchard. But would community support be enough against the Onyx Viper's looming threat of violence? That evening, a cloud bank rolled in from the west, bringing the first rumble of distant thunder. Samantha stood on the porch, the scent of ozone and damp earth filling her lungs. She welcomed the idea of rain. A wet orchard would be less flammable if the bikers truly intended to make good on their threats of arson. Still, storms brought their own risks, knocked out power, flooded sections of the property, or shorted out alarm systems. Ethan stepped up beside her, arms crossed as he watched the darkening sky. "We'll have to test the backup generator if the storm gets too strong. Don't want to lose power in the middle of a raid." Samantha nodded, glancing back to see Julia inside, texting a friend while Charlie read a comic book on the couch. She thought of how normal it all looked, yet how precarious normalcy could be. "I'll check the generator once the rain starts," she said. "See if it's running steady." Rain began to fall in heavy sheets around dusk, wind whipping across the orchard. Samantha and Ethan rushed to secure loose boards and tools. Julia and Charlie helped corral the chickens into the coop, Scout running among them, barking encouragement. Afterward, they all retreated to the farmhouse. Through the windows, flashes of lightning illuminated rows of trees bent under the assault of wind and water. As night settled, the house glowed with lanterns and flashlights, anticipating the possibility of a power outage. Samantha alternated between checking windows for intruders and confirming the orchard's security systems were still online. Thunder shook the panes, and lightning strobe lit the yard. Every so often, she thought she saw shapes moving between the trees, but it turned out to be branches swaying in the storm. "It's a good night for them to move in," Ethan said grimly. "This weather covers a lot of noise." Samantha gripped her rifle. "Agreed, but we're watching. If they think the rain makes us let our guard down, they're wrong." Midway through the storm, shortly after 10, the power blinked out. Samantha cursed under her breath. She grabbed a flashlight and hurried to the barn with Ethan at her side, water drenching them in seconds. They found the generator set up in a lean-to, surrounded by stacked crates. The wind howled and lightning lit the sky enough to see the orchard silhouette around them. Ethan pulled the generator's cord, but nothing happened. He checked the fuel line. Someone had cut it. A single clean slice in the tubing. "Damn it," Samantha hissed. "They did this." Ethan's expression hardened. They must have snuck in right before the storm hit. Maybe those footprints we found last night weren't a random test after all. They were prepping for sabotage. Lightning split the sky, thunder cracking like artillery fire. Samantha glanced at the dark orchard, heart pounding with anger and resolve. "We won't let them corner us. Let's fix the line if we can, or rig a patch." The orchard's cameras and motion sensors need power. In the gale, they worked side by side, splicing the cut fuel line with duct tape and spare tubing. Rain pummeled them, but they managed to get the generator sputtering. A yellow glow flickered across the farmhouse windows. Samantha felt a surge of relief. The orchard wasn't defenseless, not yet, but the night was far from over. Returning to the farmhouse, soaked and shivering, Samantha found Julia and Charlie waiting anxiously in the dimly lit kitchen. "We got the generator running," Samantha announced, stripping off her dripping jacket. "But someone cut the fuel line before this storm. Keep your eyes peeled for any sign of movement." Charlie looked alarmed. "Mom, are they out there right now?" Ethan squeezed water from his hair, shaking his head. "Hard to say. If they are, they're lying low." Julia's hands gripped the edge of the kitchen counter. "Let's hope they don't try to break in," she said, her voice trembling despite her bravado. "This weather is scary enough." Samantha shot her daughter a reassuring look. "We won't let that happen, but it means we need to stay on alert. Julia, you watch from the upstairs window. Charlie, you stay here with Scout. Ethan and I will circle through the barn and orchard a few more times tonight." Thunder rattled the dishes in the cupboards, and another flash of lightning revealed the orchard in eerie, monochrome illumination. Samantha draped her wet jacket over a chair, checked the pistol at her hip, and nodded at Ethan. "Let's go." They ventured back outside, the wind lashing at them. The orchard's newly installed motion lights flickered in response to blowing branches. Rain-soaked grass squelched underfoot. Samantha moved carefully, rifle at the ready. After checking the main rows of trees, they headed for the fence where the footprints had been discovered. The area was a swampy mess, water pooling around the posts. She shone her flashlight, scanning for fresh tracks, but found nothing conclusive in the churned mud. Could be they're waiting for the storm to pass, Ethan shouted above the roar of the wind. Or maybe their sabotage was enough for one night. Samantha nodded, wiping rain from her eyes. We'll do one more sweep, then head inside. She wanted to be thorough, but also knew she and Ethan risked hypothermia if they stayed in the downpour too long. It was on the final circuit near the creek path that Samantha's flashlight caught a glimpse of something. A black bandana snagged on a branch, fluttering in the wind. She plucked it free, heart hammering. The Onyx Vipers sometimes wore black bandanas with their emblem. This one bore a faint design, half washed away by rain, but it was enough to confirm an intruder had been on their land recently and had left in a hurry. She and Ethan exchanged a grim look. Then they returned to the farmhouse, where Julia and Charlie were wrapped in blankets, watching the storm from the windows. Samantha offered them the soggy bandana, explaining what it meant. The children's eyes widened with a mixture of fear and anger. They're literally stalking us, Julia hissed. The good news, Ethan said, trying to lighten the mood, is that they haven't tried a full-on assault yet. They're still hoping to rattle us into submission, I think. Charlie clenched his small fists. They're not scaring us away, right? No, Samantha assured him, ruffling his hair. We're staying right here, but we have to be smart and careful. They settled in for a long night, each person taking a shift at a window, scanning the orchard for movement. By morning, the storm waned, leaving puddles and fallen branches in its wake. Samantha surveyed the orchard with a heavy heart. Only the occasional bird call and dripping leaves broke the silence. Yet her nerves remained on edge, anticipating that the Onyx Viper's next move might come with the dawn or the following night, or any moment they deemed opportune. The storm's departure unveiled a bright sunrise, but Samantha took little comfort in the golden light slanting through the orchard. When she exited the farmhouse, her boots squelched in muddy patches, and a chilly wind brushed her damp hair. She inhaled slowly, forcing herself to notice the orchard's lingering beauty, even amid her anxiety. Despite sabotage and threats, nature continued. The apple trees still vibrant, and the valley's peaks gleaming under the fresh-washed sky. After a quick breakfast, Ethan and Samantha did a thorough inspection of the orchard's defenses, confirming no new damage besides the cut generator line. Julia left for a half-day at school, and Charlie sulked about not being able to roam freely. Samantha had forbidden him from wandering the property without adult supervision. He settled for playing with Scout in a small fenced yard behind the barn, occasionally glancing toward the orchard as if expecting trouble. Late morning brought Sheriff Delgado's patrol car up the drive. This time he had a deputy in tow, a young man named Ramirez who seemed earnest but visibly uneasy. Delgado stepped out, taking in the orchard's sodden state. We've been patrolling the roads, Delgado said, adjusting his belt. Saw 3 or 4 Vipers heading east this morning. Might be traveling to the next county or regrouping somewhere. Samantha crossed her arms. Any sign they plan to storm this place? Delgado's eyes flicked to Ethan, who stood nearby with a hand resting on his own holstered gun. No confirmation, but my gut says they haven't given up, especially since folks around town have been resisting them more after seeing how you won't bow. They might feel they have to make an example of you. Ethan nodded. We're prepared for that, Sheriff. Delgado frowned, glancing at the orchard's improvised defenses. Just remember, lethal force is a last resort. If it comes to that, I'll back you up if your life is in danger. But the county attorneys might not be so sympathetic if they think you escalated first. Samantha bristled slightly. You'll find no provocation from me, Sheriff. I'm only defending my property. I know, Delgado said, lowering his voice. But these bikers are experts at playing the legal gray areas. They might try to provoke you into firing first. If that happens, the law might see you as the aggressor. His words sank in like a cold stone. Samantha recalled missions overseas where insurgents tried to bait her unit into overreacting, sowing chaos that benefited the enemy's narrative. Now, in her own backyard, she faced a similar dance. I appreciate the warnings, she replied. I'll keep it in mind. After a quick tour of the property, Delgado and Ramirez headed out, promising an evening patrol. Samantha watched them depart, an unsettled feeling churning inside. As robust as her defenses were, a battle of perception loomed. If the Onyx Vipers manipulated events so that it appeared Samantha attacked first, she could face legal repercussions. And with her children in the mix, that risk was devastating. Ethan must have sensed her conflict. "We'll handle them without starting anything," he said. "If they show up with guns, they'll be the aggressors. We'll have every right to defend ourselves." Her eyes narrowed at the horizon. "Yes, let's just hope we don't have to prove that in court, or worse, at a funeral." With the weekend deadline looming, Samantha felt the tension coiling tighter with each passing hour. She and Ethan spent much of Saturday making final arrangements, clearing obstructions that could trip them during a nighttime defense, stocking extra supplies in the storm shelter, and placing more trail cameras to cover blind spots. Julia, after returning from school, helped label boxes of apples in the barn, her expression set in a resolute frown. Charlie tried to distract himself with chores and occasional board games, but even he couldn't ignore the undercurrent of fear. By late afternoon, the sun dipped low, painting the orchard in warm golden hues. Samantha gazed over the rows of trees, trying to swallow the lump in her throat. This land meant everything to her: her fresh start, the safe haven for her kids, and a tangible expression of the peace she'd tried to cultivate after years of turmoil. The thought of losing it to a gang of violent opportunists churned her stomach with both anger and sorrow. As darkness gathered, they formed a plan. Ethan would station himself in the barn loft, armed with binoculars and a shotgun. Julia would remain in the farmhouse with Charlie, barricading the doors if necessary, while Samantha roamed the orchard's perimeter with her rifle, using the vantage points they'd established weeks prior. They set up a schedule of half-hour rotations, so no one would be alone for too long in any one spot. 9 o'clock ticked by, then 10. The orchard lay in near silence, punctuated by the occasional hoot of an owl or rustle of wind. Samantha crouched behind a barricade of stacked wood near the north fence, scanning the gloom. She wore a dark jacket and a low-brim hat to mask her face. Through her night vision scope, she saw only the swaying outlines of trees. A chill crept along her spine, a mix of tension and the cool night air. Shortly before 11, she heard the low roar of motorcycles in the distance. At first it was faint, but it grew louder, echoing off the valley slopes. Samantha tensed, clicking her earpiece. "Ethan, you hear that?" "Yeah," he replied quietly. "Counting at least a dozen. They're coming up the main road." Her breath caught. "Stay alert. Julia, lock the farmhouse. Keep Charlie inside and get ready." Moments later, through the fence slats, she saw the flicker of headlights approaching the orchard. The bikes pulled to a stop just beyond the gate, engines idling in a chorus of deep rumbles. A figure dismounted and approached the gate. Even without perfect visibility, Samantha recognized the stocky frame and commanding posture. Crusher. She gritted her teeth, anticipating the worst. Crusher rattled the gate, calling out in a booming voice, "Alvarez, you got 2 minutes to come talk, or we show you what happens when people say no to the Onyx Vipers." Samantha's heart hammered as she debated whether to confront him openly or maintain her hidden vantage. Through the earpiece, Ethan murmured, "He's got about 10 more with him, maybe more behind the bikes. See multiple silhouettes. This is it." She took one deep, steadying breath. "I'm not letting them in without a show of strength." Rising from her cover, she walked forward with her rifle slung across her chest, stopping about 10 yards from the gate. "You're trespassing," she called out, voice steady, "and I've already said I'm not interested in your offer." Crusher slammed a gloved hand against the metal. "You think you're real tough, don't you? Hiding behind barbed wire and fancy cameras. Tonight, you either pay what we're owed, or you pay in blood." He paused, letting the words hang like a guillotine blade. "Let me in so we can talk face to face." Samantha held her ground, adjusting her rifle. "If you want to talk, back your men off and come alone. Otherwise, this conversation ends here." A beat of silence, then Crusher laughed, a harsh sound. "I don't walk alone, sweetheart. That's not how this works." The orchard seemed to hold its breath. Samantha knew the next few seconds would decide everything. If she opened the gate, they might overwhelm her. If she refused, they might open fire or try to ram their bikes through. Her earpiece crackled with Ethan's tense whisper, "I'm covering you. Whatever you do, do it fast. Mawa, Samantha Alvarez stood by the gate, heart pounding as the onyx vipers roared on the other side. Their headlights cut through the orchard's darkness, illuminating her in stark relief. Just yards away, Crusher waited with half a dozen of his men, and more waited out of sight. Their engines rumbled like caged thunder, poised for violence. Samantha had her rifle slung across her chest, finger resting near the trigger guard, but not yet pressing it. She knew that if anyone fired first tonight, the law might paint her as the aggressor. At the same time, she couldn't let these criminals surge onto her property unchallenged. Lightning flickered in the clouds far to the north, a residual echo of the storm that had swept through the night before. The orchard smelled of wet grass and turned earth, but a raw tension burned in the air like ozone. From Samantha's vantage, she could see Ethan in the barn loft, his silhouette faintly visible, shotgun at the ready. The farmhouse lights were off. Inside, Julia and Charlie stood by a window, peering out anxiously. For a moment, Samantha wondered if she should simply yield to Crusher's demand for a conversation. But she recalled Sheriff Delgado's warning. These men love to provoke a reaction, then twist the narrative to claim self-defense. She had to walk a razor's edge, showing strength without losing the moral high ground. Crusher banged on the gate again. "I'm done asking nicely," he growled, though the threat in his voice was anything but polite. "You can open this fence, or we'll tear it down. It's your choice." Samantha forced herself to speak calmly, though adrenaline made her pulse hammer. "If you try to break my property, you'll be trespassing and committing felony vandalism. Turn around and leave before things get out of hand." Her refusal triggered a ripple of anger among the bikers. One revved his engine, another spat on the ground, cursing under his breath. Crusher raised a hand, silencing them. "You think we're scared of charges? You think a locked gate will keep us out? You've got 30 seconds to let me in. Then we do this the hard way." In the barn loft, Ethan racked the pump on his shotgun, the sound echoing across the yard. Samantha heard it too, a statement of readiness that carried more weight than any threat could. Crusher cocked his head, clearly aware that the orchard was defended by more than one determined person. Another group of bikers pulled up behind the first line. She counted at least 4 more bikes, making the total close to a dozen riders. The main road behind them was quiet, no sign of the sheriff's patrol car yet. Time stretched, the air thick with anticipation. Samantha's thoughts whirled. If she gave in, Crusher and his men might rummage through her orchard, intimidate her children, and name their price at gunpoint. If she didn't, they might attempt to force their way in. Either way, the confrontation was inevitable. When the next wave of tension broke, Samantha squared her shoulders and decided to take a risk. "Fine," she said, gripping the gate latch. "I'll let you in, but only you. The rest stay outside." Crusher's eyes glinted at her offer, suspicion tinged with a predatory glee. He signaled for his men to wait. Slowly, Samantha lifted the crossbar and swung open the gate just wide enough to admit a single person. As the heavy metal grated across the gravel, she held her rifle in her left hand, muzzle angled downward in a show of restraint. If he rushed her, she could have the barrel up in seconds, but she couldn't brandish it openly, not yet. Crusher stepped through the gap, helmet in one hand, grin twisting the scar along his jaw. He stood close enough that Samantha could smell his leather vest and the faint odor of stale beer. Behind him, his men idled, engines growling. The orchard felt abruptly small, as if the towering pines had shrunk in the face of this looming threat. Still, Samantha held her ground. "Stay where you are," she snapped at the other bikers. "Try to come through and you'll face consequences." Crusher tossed his helmet aside, rolling his shoulders like a boxer entering the ring. "We can skip the tough talk. You know why I'm here." His voice carried a hint of smugness, as though he relished this showdown. He glanced around the yard, taking in the barn, the farmhouse, the rows of apple trees beyond. "Nice setup, Alvarez. I bet it'd be a shame to see it all torn up. Me and my boys could do that in under an hour, you realize." Samantha felt her jaw tighten. "We both know your threats aren't going to break me. You want money, you won't get it. You want the orchard, you'll have to fight for it. But I guarantee that'll cost you more than you bargained for." For a moment, Crusher was silent, clearly weighing his options. The night insects droned a haunting chorus, the only sound besides the low rumble of motorcycles. At last, Crusher chuckled darkly, shaking his head as if disappointed. "Lady, you're good at the defiant act. I'll give you that. But you're outnumbered. You think that old rifle and a friend with a shotgun are going to stop us?" He lifted his gaze to the barn loft, where Ethan's presence was half hidden behind shadows. An uneasy standoff followed, but it couldn't last forever. Crusher took another step forward, forcing Samantha to either retreat or stand nose to nose. She chose the latter, meeting his gaze with unflinching resolve. "Listen up," Crusher said, voice dropping to a menacing hush. "I've dealt with people like you before. You want to be a hero, but this ends with your orchard on fire, your neighbors too scared to help. The only way out is to give me what I want. And trust me, I always get it." Samantha's stare didn't waver. "Not this time." She inclined her head slightly, letting her voice carry across the yard. "Ethan, keep eyes on the rest of them. If they move, you let them know we're serious." A faint murmur of acknowledgement came from the loft. Crusher's shoulders bunched as he realized he was standing in a crossfire zone. Samantha saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes, though he tried to mask it behind bravado. "Last chance, lady," he hissed. "Don't make us do this." The orchard seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her next move. Samantha felt that old, familiar stillness settle over her, the calm before triggering a shot. "You already did," she said quietly. And with that, she reached behind her and slammed the gates shut, locking Crusher inside while his men remained trapped outside. A roar of outrage erupted from the bikers outside the fence as they realized what had happened. Engines revved, and several riders surged forward, shaking the chain link and throwing curses at Samantha. Crusher spun around, eyes blazing, but found himself isolated inside the orchard without immediate backup. Samantha raised her rifle to her shoulder in one smooth motion, the muzzle now aimed directly at his chest. "Don't move," she warned, the authority in her tone unmistakable. For a moment, Crusher hesitated, his gloved hands flexing as though testing whether he could grab her weapon. But Ethan's shotgun clicked from the loft, a reminder that the orchard's vantage points were covered. Crusher might be bigger and stronger, but Samantha had him pinned in a kill zone, and both of them knew it. Outside, the bikers pounded on the gate, shouting for Crusher to take her down or just open the damn gate. One tried scaling the fence, but Ethan fired a warning shot into the dirt, scattering them back. Samantha's heart thumped wildly, but she kept her stance controlled. Finger just off the trigger, ready but not yet pulling. "Tell them to back off," she commanded Crusher. "Tell them to leave, or I swear you won't walk out of here." Crusher's face contorted with rage. He looked as though he might challenge her anyway, but some survival instinct won out. "Stand down," he yelled over his shoulder, voice cracking like a whip. "Just hold on. We'll handle this." His men went quiet for half a second, uncertain whether to obey. Then a slender figure in the group, recognizable as Snakebite, shouted back, "Boss, we can just blow the fence with a shotgun blast." Samantha pressed the rifle's barrel more firmly against Crusher's chest, forcing him a step backward. "Your crew tries that. They'll lose you. Do you think they'd risk your life?" Crusher breathed heavily, eyes flicking between Samantha's unwavering stare and the barn loft overhead. For a brief moment, the orchard's tension peaked, a precarious teeter between bloodshed and reluctant surrender. Finally, Crusher grimaced, looking over the fence. "Nobody blasts a hole. Everyone hold position," he barked. The chorus of revving engines died down a notch, though Samantha could still feel the biker's fury pulsing through the chain link. In the hush that followed, Samantha's chest rose and fell with measured breaths. "You lost the upper hand," she told Crusher. "Now you're going to order your men to ride away. If you do, you'll walk out of here in one piece. If you don't, they'll leave minus their leader." Crusher spat on the ground at her feet, jaw clenched. "You're playing with fire, Alvarez." She stared him down, her own words coming out calm and certain. "No, you brought fire here. I'm just not afraid of it." Through the rifle scope, she could see his nostrils flaring, the wheels in his mind turning. He was ex-military, meaning he understood exactly how this standoff might end if he didn't cooperate. Seconds stretched into an eternity, the orchard as silent as a crypt. Then Crusher raised both hands, palms open in a mock gesture of surrender. "Fine, I'll pull them back. But don't think this is over. We'll just hit you harder next time." Samantha kept her rifle trained on him. Go on, tell them. Glaring, Crusher turned toward the fence. He lifted his voice above the rumble of idling motorcycles. Vipers, back to the main road. We're leaving. A few shouted protests, but he cut them off with a raised fist. Don't argue, go! Reluctantly, the group peeled away from the chain-link gate, heading in a loose formation down the gravel road that wound back toward the highway. Samantha kept the rifle pressed to Crusher's chest, watching as the last tail light disappeared into the darkness. Only then did she lower the barrel of fraction, though she remained poised to fire if he attempted any sudden move. He glowered at her in the orchard's dim illumination. You think this settles anything? All you did was embarrass me in front of my men. Now they'll want blood more than ever. Samantha's heart pounded, but her voice stayed controlled. I'm not naive. I know you'll regroup, but you leave tonight and you leave alone. She gestured with the rifle. Hands on your head. We're going to walk you to your bike, and you'll ride out of here without your goons. The orchard lights threw shifting shadows across Crusher's face, accentuating the furious lines etched into his features. He complied slowly, placing his hands atop his head, fingers interlaced. Samantha felt a flash of déjà vu. This was precisely how she'd handle a hostile in her special forces days. Old instincts guided her movements as she took a firm grip on his elbow, steering him away from the gate. Ethan emerged from the barn, shotgun held steady. He wore a grim expression that matched Samantha's tension. I'll keep watch from here, he told her quietly. Make sure the rest of them stay gone. Samantha nodded, shifting her attention to Crusher. Let's go. They walked across the orchard yard, rain-soaked gravel crunching underfoot. At the far side of the property sat a battered old chopper, likely Crusher's personal bike, left hidden behind a cluster of pine trees so he could approach on foot if needed. Samantha recognized the cunning in that plan. He'd intended to trap her from two angles. Instead, it was he who had been caught alone. When they reached the bike, she stepped back, rifle still pointed. Get on and ride. Don't think about doubling back. We have watchers at every approach. Crusher swung a leg over the seat, hands gripping the handlebars. He paused to glare at Samantha, and for a split second, she wondered if he might lunge. Her finger inched closer to the trigger, but then with a snarl, he kicked the engine to life. The chopper sputtered, headlights cutting a beam through the orchard gloom. You're making a big mistake, he said over the roar of the engine. But fine. Tonight isn't your night, Alvarez. Soon enough, though, I'll be back. Count on it. Samantha's chest tightened with the surge of adrenaline. Every muscle coiled. Go, she commanded. With a rev of the throttle, Crusher sped off, disappearing down a narrow trail that wove toward the main road. Samantha stood there, rifle raised, until she was sure he was gone. Only then did she exhale a shuddering breath. Ethan appeared at her side, scanning the trees. We did it. Forced him out without a shootout. Samantha nodded, though the weight in her stomach didn't lift. We bought time, that's all, and we humiliated him in front of his gang, which might make him more dangerous. Ethan slung his shotgun over his shoulder. Then we use that time wisely, fix up any weak spots, gather allies, because Crusher and the Onyx Vipers won't let this go. Not after tonight. Daylight revealed fresh tire marks in the road outside the orchard, evidence of the Onyx Vipers' hasty retreat. Samantha walked along the fence line with Ethan, checking for any new damage. They found a few scattered beer cans near the gate and a bent fence post where someone had attempted to force entry. Nothing irreparable, but it was a stark reminder that the bikers were likely to return with larger numbers. Julia and Charlie joined the inspection, trailing behind warily. Charlie nudged one of the discarded beer cans with his sneaker. Do you think they'll come back tonight? He asked, trying to sound brave but not quite masking the tremor in his voice. Samantha glanced down, wanting to reassure him, but she refused to lie. It's possible, but we proved we won't let them push us around. That might slow them down at least. Julia shoved her hands into her jacket pockets. I heard Crusher say he'd be back soon. He looked furious. He was, Ethan acknowledged, but furious doesn't always mean reckless. He'll want a plan that guarantees victory next time. We have to be ready. Back at the farmhouse, Anthony Wong arrived just before noon with a load of supplies. He hopped out of his old truck, face etched with concern. Heard the Vipers tried something last night. The whole town's buzzing about it. A couple of them hit up the diner afterward, bragging that they'd be taking this orchard soon. Samantha stiffened, anger surging like a hot wire through her veins. So they're already spreading propaganda to intimidate people. Anthony nodded. The rumor is they're calling in members from other chapters, possibly doubling their numbers. I came by to see if you need anything, and to tell you folks around town are on your side. Even those who were scared are starting to realize that giving in won't stop the Vipers. It'll only feed them. That sliver of communal support sparked hope in Samantha's chest. Thank you. Honestly, knowing the town supports us might be as important as any weapon. Anthony helped unload groceries, extra batteries, and a few first aid supplies. He paused, looking around at the orchard's reinforced windows, the barbed wire in certain sections, and the improvised barricades. I never knew you had all this in you, Samantha, but I'm glad you do. Julia and Charlie offered to help Anthony while Samantha and Ethan strategized. Standing near the chicken coop, Samantha stared at the orchard, where footprints from the night before were still visible in the muddy patches. If the Vipers add more riders, they could come in from multiple sides. We can't guard every inch by ourselves, she said quietly. Ethan crossed his arms. Maybe the time has come to call in more people. We could ask the sheriff for volunteers, or talk to neighbors who might stand guard. Samantha recalled Delgado's limited resources, but also the growing solidarity among the townspeople. We should at least try. If the Vipers see the entire community standing against them, they might back down without a bloodbath. She wasn't entirely convinced Crusher would fold so easily, but the alternative was facing an army of bikers alone. As Anthony finished unloading supplies, Samantha resolved to head into town soon, meet with anyone willing to join their defense. Because if Crusher returned with double the manpower, the orchard's new fortifications and her own skill might not be enough to protect her children, unless the whole valley took a stand. That evening, Samantha entrusted the orchard to Ethan for a few hours, leaving Julia and Charlie under his watchful care. She drove into Bridgewater, not to run errands, but to rally allies. The main street was bathed in the warm glow of street lamps. A surprising number of trucks and cars lined up along the curb. Word of the orchard standoff had spread, and curiosity tugged people out of their homes. Samantha first stopped at the general store, where Anthony Wong was closing up. He joined her without hesitation. Next, they visited the small diner across the street. Inside, a hush fell when Samantha walked in, all eyes turning in her direction. A handful of regulars murmured greetings. The rest stared, waiting to see what she had to say. She approached a table where a group of local farmers and ranchers sat nursing cups of coffee. I'm sure you've heard what happened last night, she began. Crusher and his men tried to strong-arm me. We sent them away, but now he's angry and bringing more bikers. I can't hold them off alone. Erdorum, a wiry cattle rancher named Hal, spoke first. We've all dealt with them in some form, he said, voice taut with resentment. Stolen livestock, slashed fences, intimidation. But we haven't known how to fight back without risking everything. Samantha nodded, choosing her words carefully. There's risk any way we look at it. But if we stand together, farmers, business owners, neighbors, they can't push us all around. They rely on fear and isolation. When a community unites, gangs lose their advantage. A stout man with a handlebar mustache, who ran the local lumber yard, chimed in. If we raise arms, the sheriff might see us as vigilantes, and if the gang calls in more men, some of us aren't fighters. Anthony stepped forward. You don't have to be fighters. We need watchmen, messengers, folks willing to call the sheriff at the first sign of trouble. We also need neighbors who can provide a safe place for children or help supply essential items if the orchard gets cut off. The group exchanged uneasy glances. Slowly, a woman named Maggie, a single mother who managed a small motel, spoke up. I'll take in any kids who need shelter if things get bad. My motel has a basement with sturdy locks. Nobody's using it, and I can store food there. Another man, a retired trucker, offered the use of his CB radio to alert outlying areas. An older woman suggested using her large barn as a second line of defense. The momentum grew, fueled by shared frustration at the Onyx Vipers' bullying. What about Sheriff Delgado? Hal asked. He's a decent man, but he's outnumbered. Will he support us? Samantha answered carefully. He's made it clear we can defend our property if we're under threat. He just doesn't want to see a war break out. But if the Vipers escalate, he'll have no choice but to back us up. especially if we act in self-defense. The meeting grew spirited, with townspeople sharing phone numbers, discussing watch schedules, and debating the best ways to coordinate. Samantha was struck by how many, despite initial hesitations, were willing to stand their ground rather than submit. By the time they wrapped up, she had a list of names, volunteers who pledged to help in any capacity, from supplying extra generators to patrolling roads at night. As she headed to her truck, the streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement. Samantha glanced at Anthony, who stood by her side. "I never wanted to drag others into a fight," she admitted, "but I think it's the only way to protect this valley." Anthony placed a hand on her shoulder, giving it a supportive squeeze. "You're doing the right thing. We're a community, and we protect our own." Inwardly, Samantha prayed that their newfound unity would deter Crusher's next assault, because if the Onyx Vipers swarmed the valley in overwhelming force, the cost of defending it might be measured in far more than broken fences or burned orchards. It might come in human lives, a price she desperately hoped they could avoid paying. With a renewed sense of solidarity, Samantha drove back to Whispering Pines Orchard that night, headlights sweeping across the gravel driveway. Ethan met her at the door, relief evident in his eyes. "No trouble while you were gone," he said. "Kids are fine. Julia's reading to Charlie upstairs." Samantha removed her coat, noticing how damp it was with the late evening chill. "Good. The meeting went better than I expected. People are ready to help, or at least watch each other's backs." Ethan gave a short nod. "That could make a real difference. If Crusher tries to blockade roads or cut off supplies, the town can coordinate a response." Their conversation drifted to practical matters: installing better perimeter lighting, setting up a volunteer watch schedule, and assigning safe houses in case families needed to evacuate. Samantha made notes in a small spiral pad, detailing each location and volunteer contact. Every line she wrote felt surreal. She'd been through tactical planning before, but never in the context of protecting her own home, her neighbors, her children's future. Near midnight, she and Ethan decided on a final sweep of the property. They donned warm jackets, armed themselves, and stepped out under a moonlit sky. The orchard was silent except for the soft rustle of leaves, the occasional hoot of an owl. After the tension of the previous nights, the quiet felt almost unnerving. Samantha's grip on her rifle remained tight, half expecting bikers to emerge from the shadows. Yet the patrol went by without incident. They found no fresh footprints, no sign of vandalism. The orchard, for this brief interlude, seemed at peace. Returning to the farmhouse, Samantha lingered on the porch, gazing at the moonlit rows of apple trees. She recalled how she'd first fallen in love with this land, imagining a life free from the violence and suspicion that had defined her years in the military. Ethan placed a hand on the railing beside her. "If they don't come tonight, it means Crusher's regrouping. That could take days or hours. Hard to say." She turned, meeting his gaze. In his expression, she saw both solidarity and a question. Was this fight worth it? She gave a faint smile. "Yes," she answered the unspoken query. "It's worth it. I came here to find peace, but if that peace is threatened by men like Crusher, I can't just run." Ethan nodded slowly. "You're not alone in that." They went inside, locking the doors, setting alarms, and turning off lights. Julia and Charlie slept upstairs, though Samantha suspected Julia dozed fitfully, plagued by the same worries. Before heading to her own bed, Samantha checked each window, her rifle propped within easy reach. Only then did she attempt to sleep, heart beating a steady drum of vigilance. Hours passed in a haze of half-consciousness. At one point, Samantha jolted awake to the distant drone of a motorcycle. She leapt up, peered out the window. Nothing moved in the driveway. No headlights, only the phantom echo of her own anxieties. She exhaled shakily, reminding herself that fear was Crusher's most potent weapon. He didn't even need to be present to haunt her dreams. By morning, the orchard still stood undisturbed, yet Samantha could almost sense the tension on the breeze, as if the valley itself braced for the inevitable day when Crusher and his gang returned in force. Over the next few days, Bridgewater Valley prepared itself as best it could. By unspoken consensus, farmers patrolled fence lines in pairs, store owners kept shotguns under counters, and the volunteer fire department rehearsed how to quickly contain any blaze set by criminal hands. Sheriff Delgado, though still short on manpower, agreed to coordinate radio communications between outlying ranches. A sense of community pride blossomed amid the tension. For every conversation tinged with fear, another hummed with defiance. At Whispering Pines Orchard, Samantha and Ethan worked tirelessly to bolster defenses. They replaced a few weaker fence posts, reinforced the barn loft, and even rigged a simple but loud perimeter alarm using spare car horns tied to motion sensors. If triggered, the horns would blast, alerting everyone within a mile. Julia and Charlie split their time between chores and practicing basic safety drills, learning how to slip to a neighbor's property if the orchard came under attack. Though Samantha hated imposing such burdens on them, she felt grateful her children handled it with remarkable resilience. Word filtered in through Anthony Wong that Crusher was recruiting from a neighboring county, pulling in a half-dozen more bikers affiliated with the Onyx Vipers. Local gossip claimed they were heavily armed, with some men rumored to be ex-military. Samantha took particular note of that detail. She recalled the fluid way some of the bikers moved, the disciplined approach they took when scouting her property. This wasn't a ragtag gang of amateurs. Crusher might have lost the previous standoff, but he wouldn't repeat the same mistake. Late one afternoon, as Samantha and Julia loaded crates of apples for a delivery, a pickup truck rumbled down the driveway. Sheriff Delgado stepped out, accompanied by Deputy Ramirez and a uniformed state trooper Samantha had never met. The trooper introduced himself as Officer Zimmerman from the Highway Patrol, explaining he'd been assigned to help the county deal with escalating gang activity. Delgado asked Samantha for an update, and she summarized the orchard's preparations. The sheriff listened intently, eyebrows raised at the mention of improvised alarms and defensive lines. "You've done more than I can realistically manage with my own limited force," he admitted. "Part of me worries about a firefight, but I understand your situation." Officer Zimmerman cleared his throat. "I've reviewed some notes about these Onyx Vipers. They have a history of using infiltration tactics and sabotage before launching big offensives. If they attack, they'll try to disable your power, water, and communications first." Samantha's gaze flicked to the generator. "That's why we keep spares and backups. We also have the community's radio network." Delgado exchanged a glance with his deputy. "The county commissioner wants a crackdown, but we lack the resources for a sweeping raid. Meanwhile, I got a call from a federal agent who's monitoring the Vipers in multiple states. He told me that if the gang stages a major violent event here, it'll be on the Fed's radar, though they might arrive too late to prevent it." A chill settled over Samantha. This was bigger than just a local property dispute. If Crusher unleashed serious firepower, the orchard could become a national headline. But she also recognized a silver lining. The federal government despised large-scale criminal operations that drew media attention, so perhaps that scrutiny would push Crusher to think twice. Still, Samantha couldn't rely on hypothetical federal intervention. "We'll do what we must," she said plainly. "If the Vipers come for us, we won't fold." Delgado reached out, giving her arm a brief squeeze. "I just pray it doesn't end in bloodshed. You've got a lot of people depending on you. Your kids, this town. Be sure you're ready for the consequences if bullets start flying." Samantha nodded somberly. "I've seen war before, Sheriff. I know exactly what it can cost." In the stillness before dawn on a chilly Tuesday, Samantha woke to Scout's low growl at the foot of her bed. Heart jolting, she listened. No immediate sound of engines or alarms. But Scout stared at the window, ears pricked, posture tense. Carefully, Samantha grabbed her pistol and eased to the sill. It was too dark to see much beyond vague shapes of trees swaying in a light breeze. She descended the stairs in silence, stepping onto the porch with cat-like tread. The orchard lay bathed in pre-dawn gloom. Nothing seemed obviously amiss. Yet that uneasy feeling persisted, a prickling at the back of her neck. Years of training had taught her to trust that sensation. The difference between living and dying often came down to an intuitive hunch. Within minutes, Ethan joined her, shotgun in hand, eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. "Scout not sleeping well either?" he asked quietly, scanning the perimeter. Samantha nodded. He growled at the window. "I think he senses something out there. Maybe an animal or someone." She motioned for Ethan to take the barn side while she moved toward the creek path. They maintained radio contact, using walkie-talkies with earpieces so as not to broadcast too loudly. As Samantha edged nearer to the creek, Moonlight shimmered faintly on flowing water. The orchard's fence line appeared undisturbed, but she crouched low, pressing a hand against the damp ground. Footprints. Yes, there were faint depressions in the soft soil. Her pulse quickened. This was fresh. She traced the path of prints heading parallel to the fence, as if someone had circled the orchard, testing for weaknesses. The intrusion looked eerily similar to the sabotage attempts from before. Sucking in a breath, Samantha clicked her radio. "Ethan, we have footprints here, newly made," he replied after a beat. "Found some near the barn, too. Fresh. They must be scouting again." Samantha's mind whirled. The orchard was large enough that a stealthy team could slip in and out without setting off every alarm, especially if they'd studied the orchard's layout. Her tension spiked as she considered the possibility of multiple infiltration teams, each placing explosives or disabling lines in different corners. She keyed her radio again. "Let's regroup and check the generator. That's always a prime target." They met at the lean-to where the generator stood. A quick inspection showed no obvious damage, though Samantha's spare gas cans were moved slightly. "They tried to sabotage or examine the fuel supply," she muttered. "Could be they ran off before finishing." A swirl of dread slipped through her. If the Onyx Vipers had come this close undetected, it meant they were testing the final pieces of orchard security. She realized with a jolt that this might precede a larger, coordinated attack. Everything in her soldier's memory told her the real blow would come soon. By dawn, she and Ethan had found at least 3 distinct sets of footprints, including one with a unique tread pattern that matched the shoe of Steel Claw, one of Crusher's known enforcers. Evidence that the Vipers were preparing for round 2 was undeniable. Samantha's frustration simmered. They needed to catch these men in the act, or at least intercept them before they launched an all-out assault. But short of standing guard 24/7 at every fence post, how could they prevent infiltration? Returning to the farmhouse, Samantha found Julia awake, silently making coffee. Charlie dozed on the couch. Scout curled beside him. Julia caught the worry in her mother's eyes. "They were here, weren't they?" Samantha forced a measured nod. "Just scouting, but it means they'll be back. Soon." Julia's expression hardened, a flash of fear mingling with anger. "So let's be ready." Samantha sipped the coffee, grateful for the warmth and her daughter's determined gaze. It was time to lock down every last gap in their defenses. Crusher had threatened to return in force, and the orchard would either stand or fall in the looming battle. If he came in numbers, Samantha intended to show him precisely what it meant to face someone who'd endured the crucible of Special Forces operations. The next 2 days felt like living on a knife's edge. Samantha barely slept, rotating with Ethan to keep watch at all hours. Julia and Charlie remained home from school by mutual agreement. Sheriff Delgado signed off on a temporary homeschool arrangement, citing the ongoing threat. Tension weighed heavily on every meal, every conversation. Even the orchard's normal routines became fraught with alarm. The slightest noise could be a lurking intruder. Word spread that Crusher was gathering a small army of bikers from neighboring counties. Some had rap sheets for assault or weapons charges. They gathered at a defunct truck stop outside the county line, though Delgado lacked the manpower or legal grounds to raid them preemptively. The stage was set for confrontation, but no one knew the exact hour. It was like waiting for a storm to break. One evening, a caravan of headlights flickered on the far ridge. Samantha watched through binoculars. It was too distant to see who was driving, but she suspected Onyx Vipers surveying from a vantage point. They never ventured close enough to be challenged, and eventually the lights disappeared into the night. Samantha's frustration mounted. This constant game of shadowboxing threatened to wear down her nerves. Amid the anxiety, some surprising allies arrived. A group of veterans from a local American Legion post showed up with pickup trucks full of supplies, cots, blankets, and extra floodlights. They set up a small camp on a slope overlooking the orchard, ready to assist. A pair of them had been forward observers in the military. They took shifts scanning the horizon with spotting scopes, adding another layer to the orchard's watch. "Never thought we'd be defending farmland like this in Montana," one grizzled veteran joked to Samantha, a sad smile tugging at his weathered face. "But if a fight comes, we'll do our part." Meanwhile, inside the farmhouse, Julia and Charlie stayed busy helping with communication, posting updates on social media groups, answering calls from neighbors, and mapping out who could respond fastest in an emergency. It amazed Samantha how quickly her children adapted. Julia rarely complained now, channeling her frustration into action. Charlie, though still scared, found pride in helping track local radio chatter. They were becoming part of the orchard's defense, each in their own way. On the third night of this uneasy vigil, as Samantha and Ethan huddled by the barn door watching for movement, she felt a pang of exhaustion. "We can't sustain this forever," she murmured. "If they keep us on high alert day after day, eventually we'll slip." Ethan gave her a sympathetic glance. "Crusher's plan might be just that. Wear us down until we're too tired to resist. But we've got those Legion guys and Delgado's deputies are patrolling. We'll rotate more." She sighed, massaging her temples. "I'm worried about a diversion. They hit one side of the valley while we're pinned down here." "That's why you rallied the town," Ethan reminded her. "They'll look out for each other. Even if the Vipers strike multiple places, we have enough eyes and ears to respond quickly." Despite his reassurance, Samantha couldn't shake the sense that the real battle loomed just around the corner. Every hour they stayed on guard, Crusher's men had an hour to plan, gather guns, and coordinate. The orchard felt like a fortress under siege, waiting for the final onslaught. Samantha ran through her mental checklist again. Rifles, shotguns, flares, backup power, medical supplies. Would it be enough when the bikers finally rushed in, guns blazing? She swallowed hard, pushing aside the creeping dread. One way or another, she intended to protect Whispering Pines. She could only hope it wouldn't come at too steep a price. Dawn arrived with a pale sky streaked in lavender, but Samantha's eyelids felt heavy as lead. She sipped a mug of black coffee on the farmhouse porch, scanning the orchard. Faint wisps of mist curled among the trees, and in the far distance a few veterans kept watch from their makeshift camp. The world looked so peaceful it was almost easy to forget the threat hovering just beyond the county line. Then her radio crackled. "Motion on the main road," came a voice she recognized as Hal, the cattle rancher who had volunteered to watch the eastern approach. Multiple motorcycles, heading toward the orchard at high speed. Over a dozen, maybe more. Samantha's heart hammered. She pressed the talk button. "Copy that. Any trucks or other vehicles?" "Not sure. Could be some pickups behind them. Too far to tell. I'm heading to your place now. Should arrive in 15 minutes. Samantha set the coffee aside, adrenaline jolting her awake. She keyed her radio to a different channel, alerting Ethan, Julia, and the American Legion volunteers. "We have potential inbound. Prepare defensive positions." Julia emerged from the house, hair disheveled, phone in hand. "Mom, people in town are calling. The Vipers are riding through at top speed. No sign of them stopping." Ethan strode over from the barn, shotgun slung across his back. "We've been waiting for this. Let's get everyone into position." He looked at Samantha, silently confirming they'd trigger their final plan. She took a breath to steady herself. "Julia, you and Charlie to the storm shelter. Secure it. Keep your phones on. We'll communicate as needed." She paused, meeting her daughter's gaze. "Stay safe, okay?" Julia nodded, eyes flaring with fear and resolve. She turned, calling for Charlie inside the house. Samantha and Ethan jogged across the yard, passing the reinforced barn. A few veterans scrambled to vantage points, checking that all firearms were loaded. This was it, the orchard's moment of truth. Within minutes, the roar of approaching engines became undeniable. At least 15 motorcycles, possibly more, rumbled into view, led by Crusher's unmistakable profile. Behind him, Snakebite, Steel Claw, and a swarm of other riders spread out, covering the road like a black flood. Some carried rifles across their handlebars. Others wore pistols low on their hips. Several wore fresh Onyx Vipers patches, indicating they'd been summoned from other chapters. The orchard's defenders tensed. Samantha crouched behind a crate barricade near the gate, rifle propped on its edge. She spied Ethan on the barn roof, a vantage they'd saved for the final confrontation, giving him a clear line of sight over the orchard entrance. The veterans took cover behind vehicles or in hastily dug foxholes by the fence. Crusher halted his bike just beyond the chain link, flanked by Snakebite and Steel Claw. A dozen more riders fanned out behind them, engines idling aggressively. For a long moment, no one spoke. Just the relentless rumble of horsepower thrumming in the morning air. Samantha's pulse throbbed in her temples. Crusher pulled off his helmet, glaring at the orchard's barricades. "Alvarez," he shouted, "you had your fun. Now it's time we collect what's owed." His voice echoed, brimming with fury and wounded pride. "I brought enough men to turn this place into ash." Samantha forced herself to speak with the calm clarity of a seasoned soldier. "You're trespassing. The sheriff knows you're here. We have the right to defend ourselves." Crusher laughed, the sound raw and bitter. "You think Delgado's little department scares us? We already scouted your fences. We know where your weaknesses are. And I've got more riders parked just down the road." He lifted a hand, signaling the rest of the gang to rev their engines. The roar escalated, a wave of mechanical menace. Ethan's voice came through Samantha's earpiece. "Got them in my sights. Waiting for your call." Samantha swallowed hard. This wouldn't be like the previous standoff. Crusher had brought overwhelming numbers. He was committed to either seizing the orchard or destroying it, and her. Tightening her grip on the rifle, Samantha considered her next words carefully. If she fired first, the orchard's defenders might gain an edge, but she'd lose any legal footing. If she waited, Crusher might unleash hell at his moment of choosing. One thing was certain, this confrontation had reached its boiling point. A single wrong move could spark the bloodshed everyone feared. Samantha remained crouched, heart pounding so loudly she was sure the bikers could hear it. The orchard defenders tensed, weapons trained. A strange hush fell, broken only by the growl of the motorcycles. Crusher pointed a gloved hand at the gate. "Open it, now, or we start shooting." She braced herself. "You're making a mistake," she shouted back. "Leave while you still can." In answer, one of the newer bikers aimed a shotgun at the chain link. A single thunderous blast tore through the fencing, scattering metal links and sending bits of gravel flying. That shot shattered the last vestige of restraint. Instantly, the orchard erupted in chaos. Bikers gunned their engines, surging forward. The defenders fired warning shots, some into the air, others into the dirt, hoping to deter an all-out charge. But Crusher's men were past intimidation. Several returned fire, bullets pinging off barn walls and splintering fence posts. A smoke grenade arced into the orchard, spewing thick gray clouds that obscured vision and stung the eyes. Samantha dropped to her stomach behind the barricade, aligning her rifle sights on a biker who was accelerating dangerously close. She squeezed off a single round, catching the front tire. The bike careened sideways, the rider tumbling across the dirt with a startled yell. She'd aimed to disable, not kill. Another rider took aim at her position, but Ethan's shotgun boomed from above, sending the attacker scrambling for cover. Out of the corner of her eye, Samantha spotted Crusher among the melee, bellowing orders. A bullet whizzed overhead, then another ricocheted off the crate near her shoulder. She inhaled sharply, adrenaline surging. This was no mere threat display, it was war. The orchard's defenders had to hold the line, or the Vipers would overrun them. "Fall back to the second barrier," she yelled into her earpiece, instructing a pair of veterans who had taken positions closer to the gate. They scrambled behind a second layer of crates, continuing to lay down suppressive fire. Samantha glanced toward the barn. Ethan was still up on the roof, carefully picking targets. Despite the swirling smoke, Samantha detected movement at the fence's far corner, several bikers climbing over or using wire cutters. She shifted her aim, fired 3 quick shots, forcing them to duck. A few orchard defenders unleashed short bursts, and Samantha winced, remembering Delgado's caution about lethal force. But there was no choice now. The Vipers had unleashed live rounds, and the orchard's defenders had to fight for their lives. The orchard rang with the cacophony of engines, gunfire, and shouted commands. Somewhere in the chaos, a motorbike's fuel tank caught a stray bullet, igniting in a burst of flame. Thick black smoke billowed, adding to the confusion. Samantha's lungs burned. Her eyes watered, but she maintained her vantage, systematically targeting the bikers who advanced on foot with drawn weapons. For a terrifying moment, she recalled a foreign battlefield from her past. Dust, bullets, acrid smoke, the scramble to survive. Yet this was her home, her orchard, her children huddled in the storm shelter. The realization infused her with renewed resolve. She would not let Crusher take this land. With a deep breath, she rose to one knee, rifle tight against her shoulder, scanning for the next target. Just when it seemed the orchard would descend into a full-scale bloodbath, sirens wailed in the distance. Over the racket of the gunfight, Samantha heard the piercing shriek of multiple vehicles coming fast. Headlights appeared at the far end of the road, accompanied by flashing red and blue lights that cut through the swirling smoke. Sheriff Delgado's cruiser led the charge, backed by two more county vehicles and, to Samantha's surprise, a pair of unmarked black SUVs. The moment the sirens drew near, a few of the bikers faltered. They glanced behind them, uncertain. Crusher barked furious orders, but the sudden arrival of law enforcement, and potentially more, shook their nerve. Samantha seized the opportunity. "Stand down," she shouted at the bikers nearest her. "Law enforcement is here. Surrender or leave." One of Crusher's lieutenants, Snakebite, cursed and fired a wild shot into the air, but others began pulling back. They'd counted on limited police presence, not a convoy of reinforcements. Through the rifle scope, Samantha could see Crusher slamming a fist into his handlebars, torn between pressing the attack and retreating. Another orchard defender fired a warning burst, forcing Crusher to veer aside as he tried to rally his men. Delgado's cruiser squealed to a halt, doors swinging open. Deputies took cover behind the patrol cars, weapons raised. A commanding voice blasted from a megaphone. "This is the county sheriff. All riders, drop your weapons and dismount. Now!" Amid the chaos, the black SUVs pulled up. Men in plainclothes tactical gear emerged bearing federal badges. One stepped forward shouting, "ATF! Put your hands where we can see them." Samantha realized the feds must have been monitoring the situation and decided to move in force when the violence escalated. Bikers still in the orchard froze, uncertain whether to keep fighting or cut their losses. The orchard defenders, for their part, held their positions, rifles and shotguns aimed, but no longer firing. Smoke hung heavy in the air, and a few small flames crackled where the fuel tank explosion had scorched the ground. Through the haze, Samantha spotted Crusher, revving his bike, clearly intent on fleeing before law enforcement could trap him. But as he turned to ride off, Ethan fired a shot that struck the bike's front wheel. The machine wobbled violently, tossing Crusher onto the ground with a hard thud. He tumbled through the dirt, helmet rolling away. Several bikers tried to speed past the police lines, but deputies and ATF agents swarmed, blocking the road. A handful of riders abandoned their bikes and bolted into the hills, chased by the Legion of Volunteers or tackled by the veterans who'd set up outside the orchard's perimeter. Panting, Samantha advanced carefully, rifle ready. She found Crusher on his knees, spitting blood and dust. A dislodged pistol lay feet away. Delgado and two feds converged, guns drawn, ordering him to lie on the ground. Muscles coiled with rage, Crusher glared at Samantha, but he made no move to resist. His men were either pinned by law enforcement or had fled into the woods. The orchard was littered with bullet casings, toppled crates, and plumes of smoke, a battlefield testament to how close violence had come to shattering the valley. Samantha lowered her rifle, chest tight, as she watched the ATF agents cuff Crusher and read him his rights. One agent gave her a nod of respect, acknowledging that her orchard's defenders had held out long enough for law enforcement to intervene. She swayed on her feet, exhaustion and relief colliding in a wave that threatened to drop her to her knees. Ethan appeared at her side, helping steady her. "It's over," he whispered, though gunfire still echoed from distant corners where a few bikers resisted arrest. "We did it," she exhaled shakily, tears stinging her eyes. "Check on Julia and Charlie," she managed. "Make sure they're safe." He nodded and dashed toward the storm shelter. Samantha, meanwhile, surveyed the orchard that had become her battleground. Bullet-ridden fences, scorched earth from the exploded bike, crates reduced to splinters. But the house still stood, and from inside came the sound of Scout barking. The orchard was wounded but alive. Sheriff Delgado and an ATF agent approached her, stepping carefully around debris. Delgado's expression was grim yet relieved. "We'll need statements, an investigation. There's going to be a mess of paperwork, but you stopped them from overrunning the valley." He gave her a weary salute. The ATF agent offered a curt nod. "We've been tracking these guys for interstate racketeering. Thanks to you, we can finally clamp down on their network." Samantha could only nod, heart pounding with the aftershock of battle. Her orchard might never feel the same, but at least it was still hers, and her children's. At last, after so many nights spent in fear, dawn broke over a valley free from Crusher's tyranny. The cost was high, but she'd pay it again if it meant preserving the sanctuary she had built. The aftermath of the shootout at Whispering Pines Orchard rippled through Bridgewater Valley in waves of shock, relief, and reflection. For days, law enforcement vehicles came and went, escorting captured members of the Onyx Vipers to the county jail. Some bikers remained at large, but with Crusher behind bars, the gang fractured, lacking central leadership. Federal agents combed the orchard and surrounding hills for evidence, turning up hidden stashes of ammunition and stolen goods. Samantha, weary but uninjured, gave her official statement to Sheriff Delgado and the ATF. The orchard defenders, Ethan, the veterans, and the legion of townspeople who had shown up, were hailed as heroes by many. But the physical toll was undeniable. A portion of the orchard fence lay in twisted ruin. One side of the barn sported bullet holes that would need patching. A swath of apple trees near the main gate showed scars where stray bullets tore through branches. In the week that followed, Julia and Charlie ventured outside with caution, eyes still haunted by the memory of gunfire. They spent hours helping Samantha clear debris and salvage what they could. Though physically unharmed, they bore the mental weight of having lived through a near war on their own land. Samantha tried to ease their burden, reassuring them that the worst had passed. She also made a point to publicly thank everyone who had come to their defense. This fight, after all, had become much larger than one orchard. The town of Bridgewater breathed easier. Businesses reopened with confidence, no longer looking over their shoulders for the Vipers' extortion tactics. Some folks who had once argued that resisting would only invite violence now realized that standing firm, together, had driven out a greater terror. Donations poured in to help repair the orchard and support the families whose fences or properties were damaged during the bikers' final assault. A local bake sale even sprang up to fund new security equipment for the sheriff's department. When Crusher's bail hearing arrived, dozens of townspeople gathered outside the courthouse, ensuring the judge and visiting media saw the community's solidarity. With ample evidence, firearms charges, assault with a deadly weapon, illegal gang activity, Crusher remained in custody, awaiting trial on federal counts. His men faced similar fates. The day he was led from the courthouse in shackles, Samantha watched from a distance, feeling neither triumph nor pity, only a sense of closure. Days stretched into weeks, and the orchard slowly regained its quiet rhythms. Repair crews arrived to patch bullet holes in the barn, rewire damaged security systems, and rebuild the fence. Anthony Wong arranged for volunteers to help replant the most damaged apple rows, ensuring next season's harvest wouldn't be lost. The American Legion veterans left their makeshift camp, returning occasionally for a shared meal or to lend a hand with orchard chores. Sheriff Delgado and Officer Zimmerman drove by more often, forging closer bonds with the community they had pledged to protect. As for Samantha, she found herself coping with a surprising swirl of emotions. Relief that her children were safe, gratitude for the outpouring of support, sorrow for the orchard's scars, a lingering sense of guilt that her past, her ability to handle violence, had to resurface in such a dramatic way. Yet every time she saw Julia or Charlie laugh again, or heard Scout's happy bark, she remembered why she had stood her ground. Peace wasn't something you gained by fleeing. Sometimes you had to confront danger head-on to protect what mattered most. Late one afternoon, Samantha and Ethan surveyed the orchard from the ridge. Below them, rows of apple trees stretched into the distance, patches of new fencing gleaming in the sun. Julia practiced softball swings near the barn, while Charlie chased Scout through the grass. The valley's breeze carried the scent of blossoms and fresh hope. "We did it," Ethan said softly, one hand resting on her shoulder. "Not just you and me. Everyone," Samantha smiled. "A community strong enough to stand together can weather any storm." He nodded. "Ever miss the quiet life you had before all this?" She exhaled. "Part of me does. But we've proven we can fight for it. And now I feel like we've built something stronger. A shared purpose we can protect for as long as we need to." As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the orchard in soft gold, Samantha felt a peace unlike any she'd known during her years of service. This land was her home, defended by a community that refused to bow to fear. It wasn't that violence would never again threaten them. The world was too unpredictable for such guarantees. But they had discovered a deeper truth. Unity, courage, and conviction could overcome even the darkest challenges. And so, under a sky streaked with the promise of tomorrow, Whispering Pines Orchard stood as a testament to resilience and hope. Its branches bent but unbroken, ready to bear fruit for generations to come. In the end, the orchard stands as a symbol of resilience and unity. Despite the threats and close brushes with danger, our determined protagonist, backed by steadfast friends and caring neighbors, refuses to relinquish the life she's worked so hard to build. Through countless trials, the community learns that facing adversity together not only drives out those who would exploit their fears, but also strengthens the bonds that hold them together. Looking back, it's clear that every challenge, no matter how daunting, became a chance for courage to shine and for new alliances to form. Now, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What moments inspired you the most? Which characters resonated with you? Drop your comments below and let's discuss all the insights this story brings. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more uplifting tales and thrilling adventures.